Yo, what's good, my great sages? It's your host, HD Samurai here, now here today to bring y'all a new What If. This being the What If movie, to What If Yuji had dark matter manipulation. Thank y'all so much for tuning in to What If. I really hope y'all do enjoy. As now with that being said, let's get started. So to begin the What If, we're not going to begin with the opening scene. Turning to the night sky, which stretched endlessly above the city, we will see it be illuminated by the scattering stars and the pale glow of the moon. As even at this hour, streets remain active as cars move through crowded roads while people continue through their nightlife without noticing anything unusual. However, far away from the city districts and hidden beneath an abandoned section of a railway track, we will see an old train tunnel that sat in complete silence, as the tunnel itself was worn down from age. Rust covered the rails, dust filled the air, and large cracks spread across the concrete walls, as it looks as though it's been abandoned for centuries. And for several moments, we will see nothing seem out of the ordinary, as nothing would move. Then, the silence broke, as very soon we would then hear distorted cries as they suddenly echoed throughout the tunnel, the sounds overlapping with each other, creating an unpleasant noise that spread through the darkness. And then from another perspective, we would then see the truth become visible, as we would see cursed spirit was flooding the entire area, as some were large while others were small. Certain ones crawled across the walls while others stood motionless along the tracks. Their appearance varied wildly, but currently right now all of them were focused towards the same direction. As now turning to the very end of the tunnel, we will then see a child as he slowly walked forward. He looked to be around 8 years old, with a black hoodie covering most of his body while the shadow beneath the hoodie concealed his face from view. As you see, the very moment that the child had entered the tunnel, every cursed spirit reacted. The distorted cries immediately intensified as the curses rushed towards him all at once. Some charged across the ground, while others lunged from above, as their intentions were made very clear. They were trying to kill him. But yet, in the face of all this impending danger, we will see the child as he did not move. He didn't react, as for a moment he just simply stood there. Then, we will then see 6 white wings as they emerged from his back, a sparkling white material emitting from them as they illuminated the darkness around the tunnel, their glow being almost divine. As in the very next moment, we would then hear a massive boom then go off throughout the tunnel, as an explosion would then go off as the ground violently shook as dust, smoke, and debris burst outward from the impact, with cracks spreading across the walls while chunks of concrete collapsed from above. As this rumbling would continue on for several seconds before eventually everything would then slowly become still yet again. As once the smoke would then clear, we would then see it. A massive trail of destruction would become visible throughout the tunnel as the entire path where the cursed spirits had been moments ago was now completely destroyed. As now turning to the very cause of all that destruction, we would then see the child as he stood there completely untouched, with both of his hands inside his pockets, as his expression would remain hidden beneath the hood as he silently stared at the ruined tunnel. As we will see the 6 white wings behind him as they slowly fade away, as for a brief moment, silence would then return once again. Then, footsteps would then echo from behind him, as the child hearing them would then slightly turn his head towards the approaching figure before then speaking in a cold yet emotionless tone. "Did I do well, mother?" He would question, as now turning to who he was speaking to, we would then see a woman as she approached from the darkness behind him. As she would have short black hair and wore a robe with the hood being pulled over her head, as at first glance she seemed completely normal. However, looking closely, we wouldn't see faint stitch marks that could be seen running across her forehead, as looking at the destruction around them, she would have a satisfied smile forming on her face as she looked at it. Yes you have, Yuji. In fact, you even exceeded my expectations. Very well done. Her voice carried approval, though her gaze felt analytical as she observed both the ruined tunnel and the child standing before it. As eventually she would step beside him and look towards the destruction with visible fascination, while Yuji also turned his attention towards the tunnel as well. As moonlight shined through the large cracks scattering across the collapsed structure, illuminating the ruined area, as for the first time Yuji's face would become visible beneath the hood, with his expression being completely stoic. "Is there anything else I need to do?" he would question as the woman continued smiling before then responding. "Nothing for now. I still have some loose ends I need to tie up before we can continue with the plan. So in the meantime, you would do well to stick to your training. Alright, Yuji?" she would say as she would slowly turn her head towards him. The emphasis in her voice was subtle but clear, as although she smiled at him, her eyes contained no warmth whatsoever. However, Yuji would remain silent, only nodding once in acknowledgement for her orders, as the woman seemed pleased by his response, even gently patting him on the head and calling him a good boy, before her hand would then slowly lower as her expression gradually changed. "Remember, it's crucial that you grow stronger, Yuji, because only then can humanity reach the peak of its evolution." As after she finished saying this, we would then see her as she would turn her attention back towards the destroyed tunnel, with a smile on her face slowly twisting to something colder and much more unhinged, as the ruined tunnel remained illuminated beneath the moonlight. As these would be the last words said by Kenjaku, as now from this point we would now do a flashback. From the moment of his birth, Yuji Itadori was born different from every other child. Even as a newborn, the amount of curse energy within his body was abnormal. It was not simply large by modern standards, but it completely surpassed that of 70% of the population during the current era. However, this overwhelming curse energy was not the only thing that made him abnormal. No, you see, the thing is, the moment that he was born, a strange white glittery-like substance would continuously flow from him, and though nobody within the hospital was capable of perceiving it, this would be Yuji's innate ability. Dark matter. An entirely unknown substance that did not naturally exist within the world itself. It was a material created completely through Yuji's own calculations and imagination. However, unlike normal matter, dark matter did not obey the physical laws that govern the world. Concepts such as mass, force, momentum, durability, and even natural structures could all be freely altered depending on Yuji's understanding and control. As dark matter fundamentally should never have existed within reality to begin with. But as long as Yuji could properly understand the calculations behind a phenomenon, he could reproduce and create those properties through dark matter itself, including unnatural properties. So in simple terms, dark matter was an ability with nearly limitless potential. An ability that never appeared throughout history. An ability that allowed someone to touch the territory of God. And while everyone else in the hospital would remain completely unaware of the terrifying potential Yuji possessed, there would be one person who immediately noticed this. This being none other than Kenjaku. As at that time he was inhabiting the body of Kaori Itadori, this being Yuji's mother, and the moment that Kenjaku witnessed the material leaking from Yuji and sensed the abnormal energy within him, he immediately became fascinated. Even after living for over thousands of years, he had never encountered anything remotely similar to this, and his intellectual curiosity quickly overtook everything else. Now, in the main timeline, Kenjaku eventually abandoned Yuji and continued moving forward with his plans from the shadows. But in this timeline, things were different. You see, Yuji was too interesting to ignore. So rather than leaving him behind, Kenjaku personally took Yuji away in order to study him. So for the next several years that went by, we will see Yuji as he grew up directly under Kenjaku's supervision. And during that time, well, Kenjaku personally taught him fundamentals of Jujutsu, while simultaneously researching the true nature of dark matter. As for the next following years that went by, we will see Yuji as he was constantly subjected to various tests and experiments, with Kenjaku continuously pushing both him and his abilities to their limits in order to better understand what dark matter was truly capable of. And after years of research, even Kenjaku himself became shocked by the results. As to him, Yuji Itadori did not possess a limit. Dark matter was an ability capable of adapting to nearly anything as long as Yuji could properly understand the calculations behind what he was attempting to create. And normally, such an ability would be impossible to fully utilize. However, that was not a problem for Yuji. From birth, Yuji had also been a genius. His learning speed far surpassed that of normal humans, allowing him to quickly understand and process even higher, complex concepts with little difficulty. And the more that Yuji learned, the stronger dark matter became, as eventually Kenjaku came to a single conclusion. Yuji Tadori possessed greater potential than both Satoru Gojo and Ryomen Sukuna combined. To Kenjaku, Yuji was no longer simply an experiment, he was the key to humanity's evolution. And because of this, Kenjaku spent years carefully shaping Yuji into the perfect tool for his plans. As while Yuji grew older, Kenjaku regularly sent him on missions under the guise of training. So during those missions, Yuji would be eliminating cursed spirits and Jujutsu sorcerers alike without hesitation, as everything Yuji has experienced up to this point was carefully controlled by Kenjaku. The battles, the training, the isolation, the mindset he developed, as all of it existed for one single purpose: to create the perfect tool in order to bring humanity to its peak of evolution. As now with this explained, this is where we're now going to do a 7-year time skip as we will now cut to the present. Looking at the night sky, which has settled over the city, we will now turn our attention to a local high school building, as we will see the hallways as they were filled with silence, as the classrooms were clean with chairs placed neatly on top of desks, while organized rows of tables stretched throughout the rooms. As the school itself had long since closed for the day, and we will see nothing out the ordinary, as it was supposed to be a peaceful yet calm night. Then suddenly we would then hear a loud boom then go off. A violent explosion shattered the silence as the sound of combat immediately echoed throughout the area, as the front section of the building suddenly exploded outward as concrete and debris scattered everywhere, as we'll see a figure as he was launched from the destruction as a teenage boy around 16 years old spun through the air before quickly regaining control of his body, flipping once as he landed on the top of the nearby building while sliding backwards across the rooftop. He gritted his teeth from the pain, but he still steadied himself nonetheless, as we will see the boy have black hair and dark blue eyes, as this will be none other than Megumi Fushiguro. Heavy breathing escaped from him while he kept his attention focused on the damaged school building below, as his expression remained tense yet determined. Then, suddenly from the building, we will then see movement suddenly appear, as one after another we will see cursed spirits as they begin emerging from the rubble, some crawling along the ground while others drag themselves across the walls and broken concrete, with their distorted cries quickly filling the area as dozens of curses flooded outward. And the moment they spotted Megumi, they all rushed towards him immediately. As Megumi seeing this, he could only do one thing: curse. Damn it! To think this many curses would be drawn in just because of this one damn finger. His expression tightened as without hesitation we will see Megumi as he brought his hands together into the shape of a dog shadow puppet. As in the very next moment we will then see two large dogs emerge from his shadow, this being one black and the other one white, as both of the divine dogs would then appear, and immediately growl towards the approaching swarm while preparing to attack. All the while Megumi himself would get into a fighting stance and try to defend himself the best that he can, while at the same time just mentally thinking in his mind how did things escalate this far. As from here we will now do a brief monologue. You see, similar to the main timeline, Megumi Fushiguro was assigned on a mission by Jujutsu High, and his objective was to locate and retrieve one of Ryomen Sukuna's fingers before then bringing it back to safety, as this will be the same mission that he had in the main timeline, as that will be the time where he meets Yuji for the first time. However, after tracking the cursed object's presence, Megumi eventually discovered that it had ended up inside a local high school, and that's where things began to quickly spiral out of control. You see, due to Sukuna's finger possessing overwhelming amounts of cursed energy and being capable of attracting nearby cursed spirits, this ended up resulting in the school becoming immediately flooded by curses. And before Megumi could safely secure and retrieve the object, they immediately rushed towards him, seeing the fact that he has the finger, which will lead to the present events that were happening right now. As turning back to the scene, we will see Megumi as he immediately moved alongside his divine dogs as they fought against a swarm of cursed spirits, with the dogs touring through the curses the best that they could, while Megumi himself dodged to the battlefield while countering attacking with precise strikes. And for several moments the fight would continue on evenly. But unfortunately for Megumi, eventually the overwhelming number of cursed spirits became too much for him, as turning to the scene we will see Megumi as he gritted his teeth while narrowly avoiding another strike aimed directly at his head. But before he could fully recover, suddenly a large snake-like cursed spirit would then shoot towards him from behind, as his body would immediately wrap around Megumi and restrain him tightly as Megumi's eyes widened slightly. And at the same time, the remaining cursed spirits overwhelmed his divine dogs as both Shikigami were eventually destroyed beneath the swarm, as Megumi would click his tongue in frustration while struggling against a snake cursed spirit restraining him. Then suddenly the snake-like cursed spirit would then use its tail to reach into Megumi's pocket, and a moment later we will see it retrieve Sukuna's finger as it was pulled out. And Megumi's expression immediately changed, as it turned to one of desperation and anger as he immediately cursed, while the curse itself began to raise the finger towards his mouth, preparing to eat it. And at the same time, the surrounding swarm would then rush towards both Megumi and the cursed object, as every single cursed president wanted Sukuna's finger for itself. And while Megumi struggled harder against the snake's cursed grip, this is when he then realized that he couldn't break free in time. As seeing the curses rushing towards him from every direction, Megumi just slowly closed his eyes and prepared himself for the worst. However, right as Megumi was about to be attacked by the curses, this is when suddenly a loud boom would then go off, as a deafening explosion suddenly erupted throughout the area, as a overwhelming shockwave would then instantly spread outward. As Megumi felt the pressure on his body disappeared, as the snake curse that was restraining him was now suddenly obliterated, as dust and smoke violently filled the battlefield, as Megumi coughed several times while trying to regain his footing inside the cloud of debris. What's happening? He would think mentally as gradually the dust began clearing away, and once visibility returned, Megumi would then slowly open his eyes and look forward. And the moment that he did, his eyes would widen slightly. The entire area had been destroyed. Massive craters covered the ground while debris and shattered concrete stretched throughout the entire area where the cursed spirits had been moments ago. As every curse that was there that was about to attack Megumi was gone, completely erased, as Megumi slowly looked around the ruined area in shock. What happened? He began to think in his mind as a slight chill would run down his spine. Then, suddenly, Megumi would then remember something. His eyes widened as he immediately checked his pockets before quickly looking around the battlefield. And a moment later, this is when he would then realize it. Sukuna's finger was gone. Megumi would remain standing silently within the destroyed area while trying to process what had just happened, as whoever or whatever had caused this had taken Sukuna's finger without him even noticing it. And Megumi had absolutely no idea why they did it. As from here, this is where we're now going to do a change of scenes. Turning to the inside of an abandoned building, which was dark and silent, we will see large cracks that spread across the walls and ceiling, while parts of the structure had already begun collapsing from age. We will see rusted pipes as they ran throughout the upper corners of the building, occasionally leaking water that slowly dripped onto the dusty floor below, with broken glass and scattered debris covering the ground in several areas, while old furniture remained overturned and rotted from years of neglect. As moonlight would occasionally shine through broken windows and holes in the ceiling, providing a faint illumination inside the ruined structure, as the building as a whole felt lifeless. Then, you would then hear footsteps as they echoed from the entrance, as a figure slowly entered the building. The person wore a dark gray hoodie alongside black long pants, with both of his hands resting inside his pockets, as he calmly walked deeper into the abandoned structure without hesitation. His footsteps echoed throughout the empty halls, while he continued moving further inside. And after several moments, he would continue like this until a voice would then break the silence. "Hey Yuji, I didn't know you'd be back so early. How did your little outing go?" A voice suddenly called out nearby as the tone sounded teasing yet unusually cheerful. As hearing the voice, the hooded figure would then turn slightly towards the left, as at that moment moonlight would then shine through one of the broken windows, illuminating part of his face, as it would be revealed to be none other than Yuji Itadori, who was now at the age of 15 years old, and despite his older appearance, his expression remained just as emotionless as it was before. "My mission was completed, Maito. That's all that matters." His voice sounded cold yet detached, as Yuji would then look towards the source of the voice, as leaning casually against one of the cracked pillars nearby was a young man with long grayish blue hair that reached down around his neck, several stitch-like marks running across different parts of his body and face, giving him an unnatural appearance as he wore a loose black outfit and carried an amused grin on his face while observing Yuji with a relaxed posture, as this would be obviously none other than Maito. As hearing Yuji's response, Maito chuckled lightly before shrugging his shoulders. "Oh, come on, Yuji, line up a bit, why don't you?" he would say, pushing himself away from the pillar as he casually began to approach Yuji in an almost friendly-like manner. But Yuji just silently watched him approach, however his eyes soon shifted downward. Cause you see, near the pillar where Maito had previously been leaning against was a small pile of corpses, or more accurately, transfigured humans. As looking closely, we will see that their bodies have been grotesquely twisted into unnatural shapes, with some having limbs growing in incorrect places while others barely resemble humans anymore. as Yuji would just stare at these corpses stoically while Minato noticed where he was looking at and immediately smirked. "Oh? Taking a look at my handiwork, huh?" "Yeah, I stumbled across them while they were exploring this building. Pretty foolish of them, don't you think?" His tone would remain cheerful, and Yuji would just remain silent after hearing this, as he continued to stare at the pile of dead bodies for another brief moment before calmly turning away and resuming his walk deeper into the building. "It doesn't matter. As long as this doesn't draw any attention or interfere with anything, you can do what you want." His tone remained completely factual as Minato sighed dramatically before walking alongside him. "You're seriously no fun at all, Yuji. I mean, I at least expected a little reaction from you when it comes to them. I mean, after all, you're human, you know that?" Minato would say as he placed both of his hands behind his head while continuing to walk. As Yuji hearing this gave no response as the two continued walking through the ruined halls together while silence briefly filled the area yet again. Until Minato would then speak up once again. "I mean, seriously, you don't care about neither humans nor curses. So why don't you tell me something, Yuji? If you reject both of them, then what exactly does that make you?" Minato would say as he suddenly moved in front of Yuji, forcing him to stop walking as the two stared at each other directly, as a sinister grin would then slowly spread across Minato's face as he spoke in a curious yet condescending tone at the same time. But yet, even in the face of this question, Yuji stared at him emotionlessly, as no reaction would appear on his face whatsoever, as Minato meanwhile was just continuing to stare directly into Yuji's eyes as though searching for something hidden beneath the surface. But unfortunately, Minato wouldn't get what he wanted. "That doesn't matter," Yuji would then eventually answer. "My existence is irrelevant. All that matters is accomplishing my mission and nothing more." Yuji would say, his tone sounding colder than before as his expression remained completely stoic. As after saying these final words to Minato, Yuji would then calmly walk past him and continue deeper into the building. Meanwhile, Minato himself would just silently watch him go on as the amused look on his face slowly faded, as a much more serious expression would then appear instead. His eyes focused directly on Yuji's back, or more specifically, Yuji's soul. You see, to Minato's eyes, Yuji's soul looked abnormal. It constantly shifted and warped like a black mold, spreading endlessly into different shapes as its form continuously changed without ever truly stabilizing. However, this only caused Minato's grin to slowly return, as this time it looked far more sinister. "So even you don't know what you are, Yuji Itadori. Which makes me wonder, what shape will your soul eventually take?" Excitement slowly appeared within his eyes as a hungry grin spread across Minato's face. He genuinely wanted to know the answer himself, but for now, he would have to wait. Eventually, the opportunity would come. And when it did, Minato fully intended to see the results for himself. As this would be the last scene we would see before we would then do another brief monologue. You see, throughout the years that went by, as Yuji spent growing up under Kenjaku's control, Kenjaku himself had also been making preparations from the shadows. One of those preparations involved the disaster curses. Using false promises and carefully constructed lies, Kenjaku would slowly form an alliance with them over time, under the identity of Suguru Gato, as he presented himself as someone willing to help the curses achieve their dream of replacing humanity and creating a world ruled entirely by curses. However, Kenjaku never truly cared about their goal, as to him the disaster curses were simply useful tools that could help create the chaos necessary for his plans. And while they believed they were cooperating as equals, Kenjaku continued to hide his true intentions from all of them, as everything was moving exactly according to his plan. As now with this explained, this is where we're now going to cut back to the present. So following his encounter with Minato, you'll see Yuji as he eventually returned to Kenjaku and handed over Sukuna's finger alongside a detailed report regarding the mission. As after hearing the results, Kenjaku appeared satisfied, as the operation had succeeded without issue. Sukuna's finger had been secured, and more importantly, Yuji himself had once again proven just how effective he was as a tool. And as a result, Kenjaku temporarily allowed Yuji a brief period of free time before assigning his next mission. And while normally Yuji would spend this time continuing his training or researching new applications for dark matter, instead he would find himself returning somewhere else. As now turning our attention to a familiar forest clearing hidden deep within the woods, we will see that night had already settled over the area by this time as Yuji had arrived, with moonlight pouring down through the gaps between the trees, illuminating the clearing in a pale white light, while the sound of wind gently rustled the leaves overhead. And standing near the center of the clearing was Yuji himself. Both of his hands rested inside his pockets while he quietly stared upwards towards the moon hanging above the forest, as the clearing remained silent. But you see, while Yuji would be doing this, a single thought would then cross inside his mind. Why do I keep coming back here? His expression did not change, however the question itself remained in his thoughts, as from a logical perspective there was no reason for him to repeatedly return to this location. There was nothing important here, there was no mission, there was no training, no objective assigned by Kenjaku, but yet, whenever Yuji was given free time, he usually found himself unconsciously returning to this clearing. As he could not understand the reason behind it, but as Yuji continued to stare towards the moon and quietly attempting to process his own actions, this is when the sound of approaching footsteps would then suddenly echo through the forest nearby. As Yuji's eyes shifted slightly towards the direction of the noise, as a few moments later, we will then see someone emerge between the trees. As now, taking a good look at them, we will see them being a girl, as she will have short dark green hair, which sways slightly due to the wind, along with having amber colored eyes, which reflected beneath the moonlight. She'll be wearing regular attire, and her expression will be carrying a usual mix of confidence yet irritation, as a small smirk rested naturally across her face the moment she steps into the clearing. As compared to when Yuji first met her all those years ago, she had grown noticeably much more mature. Though the stubborn attitude surrounding her had not changed whatsoever, as the girl casually placed one hand against her hip before then speaking up towards Yuji, calling out to him in an amused tone, along with a cheeky grin spreading across her face. As this will be none other than my Zenin. As Yuji silently stared at her with his usual stoic expression, we will see the moonlight as it illuminated both of them quietly, as the familiar atmosphere of the clearing returned once again. As from here, this is where we're now going to do a flashback, with Yuji now recalling when they first met. As from here, we will now do a change of scenes. So turning to about 6 years ago, long before the events that were happening now were taking place, we will see the night sky as it remained calm above the forest, as moonlight was shining down through the gaps between the trees, illuminating a wide clearing hidden deep within the forest, as the area was quiet, aside from the occasional sounds of leaves shifting from the wind. Then, soon footsteps could be heard approaching from the forest, as a young boy would then slowly emerge from the trees and stepped into the said clearing, as this would be none other than Yuji. You see, at this point, he was at the age of 10, as he would be wearing a black hoodie similar to the one he usually wore during his missions. His expression remained completely emotionless as he walked towards the center of the clearing before eventually stopping. As for a few moments, Yuji just simply stood there while staring up at the moon above him, and at the same time, he would be mentally reviewing the task that Kenjaku had assigned to him earlier that night. As his objective was simple. It was a simple curse elimination mission, as it was just a way for Yuji to gain much more experience when it came to dealing with curses. But you see, while this would be a regular task for Yuji to complete, this is where suddenly, as he was continuing to stare at the moon, and as he mentally counted down the remaining time before he would begin the mission, this is when suddenly a grunt of pain would then echo from nearby. As this causes Yuji's thoughts to then stop immediately as he slowly turned his head towards the direction the sound came from. As a few moments later, we would then see movement could be seen between the trees, before a young girl would then eventually step out into the clearing. She looked to be around 11 years old, as she would have dark green hair, with minor injuries could be seen on her arms and her legs, while dirt and scratches covered portions of her clothes as her expression looked irritated as she just gritted her teeth. Damn freaking stupid ass sorcerers! She clicked her tongue in frustration as she just curses them out, wishing they were never born, as she continued muttering curses beneath her breath while walking into the clearing. But eventually, after she does this, she would then look up as her eyes would then immediately meet Yuji's. And the two stare at each other in silence for several brief moments before then suddenly, the girl frowned. "And what the hell are you looking at, huh?" Yuji, after hearing this, says nothing, as instead he stares at her for another second before then calmly turning away, looking back towards the moon as a visible tick mark then appears on the girl's forehead, as she would just mutter under her breath about the "what the hell is wrong with this weird kid," before then wincing slightly from the pain due to her injuries. As soon we will see her as she walked over towards a nearby log and sat down while holding her bruised arm, as the clearing once again became quiet. As while this stretch of silence was happening, Yuji had returned to mentally counting down the time until his mission would begin, and he would do so while continuing to stare at the moon above him. But after several moments would pass like this is when the girl would then suddenly speak up once again. "Hey weirdo, what the hell are you even doing out here this late? Shouldn't a brat like you be in bed?" Despite the annoyed look on her face, the irony behind her own words seemed completely lost on her, as Yuji just briefly glanced towards her, before then returning his attention back towards the sky, as another tick mark would then appear on her forehead. "Don't ignore me, you bastard!" She would scream at him, but Yuji would just calmly look back at her again, before then speaking in a completely detached tone. "Why are you screaming? By doing so, you're putting additional strain on your body, and that will increase irritation around the injuries you sustain. Is there a purpose behind doing this?" He spoke in a complete factual tone, but that just caused the girl to immediately become even more irritated if that was possible. "And what the hell is that supposed to mean? You trying to start a fight or something?" She would point angrily towards him, as a stream of curses would then immediately follow afterwards, while she continued to yell at him in frustration. And all the while, Yuji just stared at her completely stoically, not taking in any of her insults. However, only after a few moments of doing this is when suddenly she would then wince once again due to her injuries, as this caused her to quiet down, as Yuji just quietly observed her condition, his eyes briefly moving across the visible bruises and cuts before then returning to her face. As the girl would then let out an annoyed sigh before then rubbing her injured arm, and after watching this, Yuji would then calmly then ask, "Did someone do that to you?" "What do you think?" The girl immediately sent him a deadpan stare, while Yuji just continued to stare at her silently, until eventually the girl looked away and leaned her head back slightly, just trying to calm down the injuries. I swear I hate those bastards. I hate the whole clan. I wish all of them would just disappear already and leave me alone. Her voice carried clear frustration as she just clenched her fist and showed visible sign of anger, while Yuji just said nothing. He simply listened, as for the next several minutes that went by, the girl continued to rant. She talked about her clan and how annoyed she was of them, how much she hated the people around her, and how badly she just wanted to beat them up one day. And throughout the entire thing, Yuji just quietly remained there without interrupting her once, until eventually the girl finally stopped talking, as she would let out a long sigh afterwards, as oddly enough she felt much more relaxed than before. As the two would remain silent once again for a few moments, until suddenly the girl then looked towards Yuji with curiosity. You know, for some random kid sitting in the middle of the forest, you're actually a pretty good listener, she would say, complimenting him as she rested her arm against her knee, while Yuji did not respond, clearly not understanding what she was trying to get at by saying that. As the girl would then eventually stand up from her log and stretch slightly, as after a few moments of doing this, she would then turn towards him once again, this time her expression looking much calmer compared to how it was before when she first arrived. "Hey, you know what? We should do this again sometime, don't you think?" Yuji immediately felt confused. What exactly did we do? He would think mentally, as the girl suddenly smirked. "Okay then, I'm taking your silence as a yes then." As she would then point directly towards him once again, this time with a determined grin. "So, since we're apparently going to meet up again, we might as well introduce ourselves, don't you think? So tell me your name, strange random kid I met in the forest." A smug grin would then appear on her face after she says this, as Yuji just stared at her blankly for a few moments. He didn't particularly understand why she wanted to know his name, but still, after a brief pause, he would then answer, giving his name as Yuji Todori, as the girl would then nod in approval. "Yuji, huh? Not a bad name." As soon, a small smile would then appear on her face, as she would then introduce herself as Mai Zenin. As after saying that, this is where Mai would then casually wave goodbye to Yuji, before then turning around and leaving the clearing. As Yuji just quietly watched the direction she disappeared into, and for a brief moment he mentally questioned the purpose behind the entire interaction. But eventually he decided to stop thinking about it, as right now he had a mission to complete. As at that moment, 6 white wings would then slowly manifest from Yuji's back. The glowing white substance surrounding them illuminated the clearing beneath the moonlight, as then without hesitation, Yuji would then rise into the air before then flying off into the night sky, ready to take on the mission that Kenjaku had assigned to him. As following that first interaction, we will see the next following years that went by, as Yuji and Mai will continuously meet up with each other throughout the next following years, as they will basically grow up together, with Yuji being there to basically listen to Mai as she complains about her daily life, and Mai just being there to vent out her frustration and also to calm down. As overall, Yuji had unknowingly become someone that she could rely on, and was someone who she actually opened up to more than basically anyone else in her life. As now with this being explained, this is where we're now going to turn back to the present. Turning our attention back to both Yuji and Mai, we will now see the two of them as they naturally fell back to the same routine they had developed over the years, with Mai complaining about her day and Yuji listening to her, as this was usually how things were supposed to go, as tonight was supposed to be no different from any other night, as we will see Mai as she would begin to speak up once again about her frustrations. "I swear, the old bastards were more annoying than usual today. I mean, seriously, it's like the Zenin clan gets more irritating every single year, as if that's even possible. And Maki, she got into another argument with them again. Like, honestly, sometimes I think she just enjoys causing me problems on purpose. Every single time she spoke, her expression twisted with annoyance as Yuji remained nearby while quietly listening to her speak. His arms stayed crossed while his usual emotionless expression remained unchanged. As Mai continued to rant afterwards about the clan, about training, about sorcerers, and about random things that irritated her throughout the day. Meanwhile, Yuji just simply listened in silence like he always did. Until eventually though, Mai would then stop talking as the clearing gradually became quiet once again, as the two would just remain there beneath the night sky while the cold wind gently passed through them and the surrounding trees. All the while above them, the countless stars stretched endlessly across the darkness, as it truly was a mesmerizing sight as Mai quietly stared upwards with a faint smile resting across her face. Meanwhile, Yuji just stood nearby with his arms crossed while silently looking towards the sky as well, with neither of them speaking as the atmosphere between them felt calm, comfortable, and even peaceful, until eventually Mai then quietly spoke up. You know, it really is a blessing to be able to have moments like these. She'll say, her voice sounding softer than before as Yuji slowly turned his head towards her. The moonlight illuminated Mai's face as she continued to stare upwards towards the stars above them as a small smile rested across her lips. However, there was also some sadness hidden within it. Moments where you don't have to worry about anything, where you can just sit there and enjoy everything around you. And honestly, if I had it my way, if I was free to do whatever I wanted, I think I'd live like this every single day. She'll say as her smile weakened slightly as for the first time that night, vulnerability briefly appeared within her expression. Her eyes reflected the moonlight above as her tone sounded honest, quiet, and almost lonely. As Yuji just silently looked at her, and strangely enough, at this moment he found himself unable to focus on anything else besides her. Not the forest, not the stars above, but just on her alone. As Yuji himself didn't understand why, meanwhile Mai herself would then eventually let out a small sigh before lightly shaking her head. And then soon afterwards she would then turn towards him. This time though, a peaceful yet affectionate smile rested across her face as she began to speak up. What about you, Yuji? What do you want to do with your life? She would say, her voice sounding genuinely curious while Yuji remained silent. And for several moments he simply stared at her before then slowly, he would then look back up towards the sky above, taking in every single detail as the quiet atmosphere surrounding the clearing returned, and at the same time Mai's question just continuously repeated itself inside his mind. What do you want to do with your life? As for the first time ever, Yuji, truth be told, he had never once thought that before. As for as long as he could remember, his life only consisted of following orders, training, missions, getting stronger, and that was all that there was. Kenjaku gave him purpose and Yuji fulfilled it. Simple. So then, what exactly did he want to do? As Yuji would quietly stare up into the night sky while attempting to think of an answer, he would find that no matter how much he thought about it, nothing came to mind. As for the first time in his life, Yuji Itadori found himself not having an answer. As the night would quietly continue on around them as the two would remain beneath the stars. As from here, this is where we're now gonna do a time skip. So turning to the next morning, which arrived quietly, we will now look inside a restaurant near the city. The atmosphere inside remained calm despite the early morning as the restaurant itself was relatively small but clean. As outside the large windows we will see morning sunlight shine across the streets and inside the restaurant, as towards the back section of it we will see several figures as they sat together around one large table, as one of them would be none other than Yuji. Meanwhile, besides him, we also see a tall man with long black hair tied partially behind his head. He wore dark robes and carried a calm expression across his face, however the stitch markings running across his forehead immediately made his true identity obvious, as this would be none other than Kenjaku, who had already taken over the body of Suguru Geto just like in the main timeline. Meanwhile, sitting around the table alongside them would be the disaster curses, as each one of them would be there discussing their plan with Kenjaku. As we now turn to when Jogo would then speak up. Okay, so let me ask you this then. How exactly are we supposed to deal with the Jujutsu sorcerers? His tone sounded annoyed, yet much more specifically frustrated, as Kenjaku calmly lifted his cup before then taking a small sip. Well, if you want to stand a chance against them, then the first thing we're going to have to do is get rid of Satoru Gojo. He would say as he slowly placed the cup back onto the counter. As the moment those words left his mouth, the disaster curses immediately focused their attention towards him, as Kenjaku would continue speaking calmly. Even if all of you worked together perfectly, you still wouldn't be able to kill him. In fact, if I'm being honest, even if I assisted you personally, I doubt we would even be able to injure him. Silence briefly filled the table as the disaster curses looked visibly shocked by what was said. Meanwhile, Jogo suddenly frowned in irritation. That's insane. Even by some chance what you're saying is true, then how exactly are we supposed to beat him? His voice carried clear disbelief, as despite the words, it was obvious Jogo did not fully believe what Kenjaku was saying. However, nonetheless, Kenjaku would remain calm. Well, usually you can't. If any of you were to encounter Satoru Gojo directly, the correct decision would be to run away immediately. And even then, there's no guarantee you would escape successfully. He would say, a slight smile turning afterwards he was finished, as the temperature inside the restaurant would immediately begin rising. Nearby customers looked around in confusion as the atmosphere suddenly became hotter, while Jogo's irritation visibly increased. However, none of the people sitting at the table reacted at all, as Jogo was about to speak up yet again, only for Kenjaku to then interrupt him. Fortunately for us, though, we already possess a solution. You see, when facing off against someone like Satoru Gojo, the best method is usually sealing them away and preventing them from escaping. Easier said than done. However, we won't be needing that. He would say, calmly folding his hands together as Jogo's anger lessened slightly, though confusion replaced it instead, as Kenjaku would just smirk. Because we aren't the ones who are going to be facing off against Satoru Gojo. Instead, Yuji will be the one to do it. The disaster curses stared at him in shock as Kenjaku would then slowly raise one hand and pointed towards Yuji sitting beside him as the entire table went silent. Then Jogo suddenly erupted with curse energy, as immediately every human inside the restaurant was instantly burned alive. Screams echoed briefly before disappearing entirely, as Jogo will get right into Kenjaku's face. You really expect me to believe this brat right here can take on this so-called Satoru Gojo you keep talking about, huh? Don't piss me off! Jogo's voice echoed angrily throughout the ruined restaurant, as while Jogo could acknowledge that Yuji did possess at normal levels of cursed energy, the idea that the boy could somehow perform better against Satoru Gojo than all the disaster curses combined sounded completely ridiculous to him, as the very thought itself felt absurd, but yet Kenjaku remained calm even after Jogo's outburst, and after a brief pause, he would just calmly look him in the eye before then answering with a yes. In fact, I don't just believe Yuji can fight Satoru Gojo, I believe he's the only person in the modern era capable of killing him. As soon as Kenjaku says this, the resolution in his voice caused every last one of the disaster curses to look at him in stunned silence, while Jogo himself stared at him for several moments before eventually he clicked his tongue in annoyance before calming himself down slightly, and instead he focused on another part of the conversation. Wait a second, you mentioned something about sealing him earlier. What exactly did you mean by that? Jogo would say, crossing his arms, while Kenjaku just calmly answered. Well, one possible method for dealing with Satoru Gojo involves sealing him using a special great curse object, like the Prism Realm. He would say as the moment Jogo heard that, interest immediately appeared in his expression, as without wasting time he would then suddenly ask, how strong am I in terms of Sukuna's fingers? Kenjaku would think about it for a brief moment before then answering. Well, if I'm being generous, I'd say around roughly 8 or 9 Sukuna's fingers. As hearing that just caused Jogo to smirk. Then forget about relying on the brat. Instead, give me the Prism Realm. I'll add it to my collection. And in exchange, I'll kill Satoru Gojo myself. As this will be the last thing Jogo would say, as a dangerous grin would then spread across his face. However, little did he know is that things weren't going to go as he expected at all. As from here, this is where we're now going to do a change of scenes. So following the discussion between Kenjaku and the disaster curses, we will see events that begin to soon play out similar to the main timeline. As not long afterwards, Jogo would eventually confront Satoru Gojo directly. However, the battle would quickly become one-sided, as despite Jogo's confidence in his strength, he would be completely outclassed by Satoru Gojo from the very moment the fight had begun, as none of his attacks were capable of reaching him, while Gojo himself overwhelmed Jogo with little effort. Until eventually, Hanami was forced to intervene in order to save him, and even then the two just barely managed to escape alive. As after experiencing Gojo's strength firsthand, the disaster curses finally accepted Kenjaku's earlier words as truth, as soon afterwards he returned and informed Kenjaku that they would cooperate fully with his plan, as with that, the preparations would then officially begin. As Kenjaku would eventually decide that their operation would take place on October 31st in Shibuya, as until then, the disaster curses would continue preparing from the shadows, while gathering strength for the coming conflict. Meanwhile, Yuji was instructed to continue training and researching dark matter, as Kenjaku believed Yuji's abilities still possessed countless possibilities left unexplored, and because of that, Yuji spent most of his time studying and experimenting further with his powers, as we will now soon enter the scene. The afternoon sky was calm as people moved throughout the city, as Yuji himself just quietly exited a bookstore while carrying several books in one hand. Most of them focus on scientific concepts such as physics and advanced calculations, as Kenjaku had specifically instructed him to study subjects related to space, force, matter, and energy in order to further develop his dark matter capabilities. As we will see Yuji as he began to walk alongside the sidewalk towards the base as his mind remained focused elsewhere, as he mentally processed various calculations involving spatial distance and interaction, and more specifically how dark matter could theoretically interfere with space itself. However, unfortunately for Yuji, the idea itself was still incomplete. However, Yuji just continued mentally testing possibilities while walking through crowded roads until eventually, after some time passed, he would arrive back at the abandoned building serving as their current base. The insides remained just as ruined and silent as before, as Yuji would then enter deeper into the building. However, as he was walking, he would then soon encounter two people nearby, as one of them would be Maito, but the other one would be a boy around Yuji's age that he didn't recognize. As Maito and the boy had been seemingly talking until they noticed Yuji's arrival, as Maito then immediately smiled brightly. "Oh, hey Yuji! Welcome back, buddy! Did you finish running your little errands?" He would say, his tone sounding unusually cheerful. However, Yuji paid almost no attention to Maito's words. Instead, his eyes focused entirely on the unfamiliar boy standing beside him, as the boy himself looked slightly confused by Yuji's sudden arrival, and at the same time, he also seemed curious about who he was. And Maito, noticing the atmosphere almost immediately, then decides to take advantage, as a smirk formed across his face before he casually wrapped one arm around the boy, and then brought him closer to Yuji. "Oh right, you must be wondering who my new friend is, huh? How about you two introduce yourselves to each other?" Maito would say with a grin. And as he said that, Maito would then slightly push the boy forward, as the boy stumbled slightly before then awkwardly looking towards Yuji, as he looked a little nervous beneath Yuji's emotionless stare, but still, after gathering himself, he would then introduce himself politely. "Oh, sorry, my name is Junpei Yoshino. It's nice to meet you," he would say after he gave a brief bow, while Yuji just silently stared at him. His expression remained completely unreadable, as the lack of a reaction immediately made Junpei slightly uncomfortable. Then Yuji slowly shifted his gaze towards Maito, as his eyes narrowed slightly. "Maito, why exactly did you bring him here?" he would say, his tone instantly becoming colder, as Maito just remained completely unbothered by the question. Instead, he just continued to act cheerful. "What do you mean, Yuji? Isn't it normal to bring friends over to hang out?" he would say as he tilted his head slightly, as a pleasant smile remained on Maito's face. However, Yuji knew better. You see, even if Maito acted friendly and approachable on the surface, Yuji understood that cursed spirits, they're just all malicious. There's no such thing as a friendly cursed spirit, and he already knew that that's what this really was. Junpei Yoshino was just simply another human that Maito had intended to experiment on eventually, before then discarding him. But still, Yuji just didn't find it in him to care at all, as long as it didn't interfere with the plan, it was irrelevant to him. So without another word, Yuji then began walking past both Maito and Junpei. However, as he passed besides Maito, he then quietly spoke just low enough for Junpei not to hear. "You just make sure your little experiment doesn't get in the way, you understand?" he would say, his tone remaining cold and detached, while Maito's smile never disappeared. As after this, we'll see Yuji as he simply continued walking deeper into the building until eventually he disappeared from the sight. As this will be the last thing we will see before we will then flash forward to a few moments later. As turning to the evening sky, which had already begun darkening by the time Yuji finishes training for the day, we will see that after spending several hours of studying calculations and experimenting with dark matter, Yuji had finally decided to take a break and get something to eat. So with both of his hands inside his pocket, Yuji then quietly walked through the city streets, as even while walking, his mind remained occupied. You see, at that moment, Yuji was mentally processing multiple calculations related to vectors, and more specifically, he was attempting to determine whether dark matter could theoretically distort space itself through enough pressure and controlled output. As the calculations themselves were complex, but Yuji processed them naturally without much difficulty. However, as he was doing this and as he was continuing walking towards a nearby restaurant, this is when suddenly several objects would then hit the ground loudly nearby, and at the same time an annoyed voice can be heard. Gosh dang it. Yuji's thoughts briefly stopped due to the noise, as slowly he would then look forward. As standing a short distance ahead of him would be a woman who appeared to be somewhere in her late 20s or early 30s. As several grocery bags have been spilled across the sidewalk around her, with various items rolling across the ground due to the impact. As from the looks of it, she had been attempting to carry far more groceries than one person realistically should have. As the woman just crouched down and began gathering the fallen items with a slight annoyed expression, yet exhaustion was also there. As Yuji just silently stared at the scene for a moment before then wondering, why would she attempt to carry that much by herself? From a logical standpoint, the situation itself seemed inefficient and overall just plain stupid. As Yuji just briefly looked around to see if anyone was nearby with her, or if anyone came with her, but there was no one. As after confirming that, Yuji immediately lost interest. There was no reason for him to involve himself in something unrelated to him. So without another thought, Yuji just attempted to simply walk past her. There's no need for me to involve myself, he would say mentally, as meanwhile the woman just continued quietly picking up her groceries while muttering complaints under her breath due to her bad luck. However, just as she was grabbing another bag of groceries, this is when suddenly someone would then tap her on her shoulder. As the woman looked upwards in confusion until she would then look behind to see none other than Yuji. As his expression remained completely emotionless as usual, however, in his arms were nearly half the grocery bags that had fallen earlier, as he looked at her calmly before then speaking up. I believe you dropped this, miss. The woman blinked in surprise for a moment before then a small smile then appeared on her face. Oh, thank you so much, she would say as she quickly gathered the remaining groceries before then standing back up. As afterwards she would attempt to carry the bags that Yuji was holding as well, until unfortunately the moment that she grabbed them, it became immediately too much for her. As Yuji just quietly watched this happen before then after a brief pause he would speak up. Would you like help carrying them? The woman looked surprised again, and her tone immediately shifted to that worry. Oh, no, you don't have to do anything like that. I wouldn't want to bother you. However, Yuji just simply grabbed parts of the groceries again anyways. It's fine. I'm not in a hurry to do anything right now, he would say, his tone remaining detached as the woman looked at him silently for several moments. Then she eventually smiled warmly. Well, if you insist. As soon afterwards, we would then see the two of them as they began walking together through the city streets. As during the walk, Yuji carried a large portion of the groceries, while the woman occasionally attempted a conversation with him. As while Yuji would be doing this, he just remained internally confused. Why am I doing this? He would be thinking, as by all logical standards, this interaction served no purpose. It did not benefit the plan, it did not assist his missions, it held no real value, yet despite understanding all of that, Yuji still continued helping her anyway. As the thought itself felt strange to him, as eventually after several more minutes of walking, the two would then arrive at the woman's house, as the woman smiled once again before taking the groceries from him. Thank you again for the help, you really helped me a lot. As Yuji just gave a simple nod before then saying it was no problem. As the bluntness in his tone caused the woman to chuckle slightly, as she then opened the front door, she casually spoke once again. You know, it's kind of funny, I actually have a son around your age. I'm pretty sure you two would get along really great, she would say as she smiled slightly as the moment the door opened, footsteps could be heard immediately approaching from inside, as a voice would then call out. Oh, hey mom, welcome home, I'm glad to see... The voice suddenly stopped mid-sentence as Yuji calmly looked towards the person standing at the doorway, and at that same time, the person standing there would stare back at him in complete surprise, as it would be none other than Junpei. As for several moments, silence filled the entrance of the house, as Yuji remained expressionless, meanwhile Junpei could only stare at him in confusion and in shock. As from here, this is where we're now gonna do another brief time skip. So following Yuji's discovery that the woman that he had been helping was Junpei's mother, the situation developed into an unexpected direction. As after the initial surprise between both Junpei and Yuji had passed, Junpei's mother quickly insisted that Yuji stay for dinner as a thanks for helping with the groceries earlier. And at first, Yuji attempted to decline, as from his perspective, there was no logical reason for him to remain there any longer than necessary. However, Junpei's mother continued to insist repeatedly until Yuji eventually agreed, simply because refusing any further would become unnecessarily troublesome. And so for the next several hours that went by, we will see Yuji as he remained at their house, as the dinner itself was surprisingly peaceful. Junpei's mother did most of the talking throughout the meal, occasionally dragging Junpei into the conversation, while trying to create a much more relaxed atmosphere between the three of them. Junpei himself seemed slightly awkward at first due to Yuji's emotionless personality, though eventually he began speaking more naturally as time passed. Meanwhile, Yuji just remained quiet most of the time, as he just listened to their conversations, while occasionally responding whenever spoken to directly, all the while calmly eating his food. As despite how ordinary the situation was, the atmosphere felt strangely unfamiliar to him. But yet the experience itself, while it did feel strange, it also did not feel unpleasant. As even though the situation itself made little logical sense from Yuji's perspective, he still found himself remaining there without issue. And more importantly, during the dinner, Yuji had noticed something unfamiliar within himself. A feeling that he couldn't fully understand. It was not irritation, nor was it discomfort, but instead it felt calm and comforting. As the realization itself only confused Yuji further, because despite not understanding why he felt that way, he also realized that he didn't dislike it. As eventually, once dinner had ended, we will see Yuji as he quietly left Junpei's household and returned back to the base. However, even after returning, the unfamiliar feeling from earlier still lingered faintly within his mind. As for some odd reason, Yuji only felt this type of way whenever he was with Mai, but that was about it. So for him to experience this again, he found himself being genuinely confused by his own emotions. But at the same time, he would still recall Mai's words as they would ring in his ears. What do you want to do with your life? As this would be the last thing that Yuji would think before we will now do a time skip. So now, following Yuji's dinner with Junpei and his mother, we will see the next several days as they pass by relatively quietly. As during that time, Yuji continued carrying out his usual routine, as most of his days were spent training, studying, and experimenting with dark matter. As whenever he wasn't on a mission, Yuji could usually be found reading books related to physics, mathematics, and engineering, along with biology and any other field that might help him better understand the possibilities of his ability. As the more knowledge he acquired, the more applications dark matter seemed capable of producing, and as a result, Yuji spent nearly every available moment learning something new. And at the same time, he continued refining his control over dark matter, as through consistent experimentation, some tests focus on improving efficiency while others focus on increasing output. And occasionally, Yuji will even attempt to explore entirely new concepts that never crossed his mind before. As all of this was just to make Yuji grow stronger, as this was his regular routine. It was how he lived for most of his life. However, something unusual began happening during those same days. As for some reason, Yuji kept running into Junpei and his mother, and most of these encounters happened completely by chance, as sometimes Yuji would see Junpei while passing through the city, and other times he would encounter Junpei's mother while she would be shopping or running errands. And on a few occasions, Junpei himself would end up spotting Yuji first. Normally these interactions should have ended after a brief conversation, yet somehow they never did. In almost every encounter, eventually Yuji resulted in spending time with them, as sometimes they would eat together, other times they would simply talk while walking to the city, and occasionally Yuji would just find himself sitting inside their house once again, while Junpei and his mother carried most of the conversation. And throughout all of it, Yuji just never understood how he kept ending up here. And more importantly, he never understood why he continued allowing it to happen. As from a logical perspective, none of it served any purpose. They weren't connected to a mission, they weren't useful for Kenjaku's plans. There was no practical benefit to being involved with them at all. But yet, despite not understanding all of this, Yuji kept returning. And strangely enough, he didn't mind. As just like when it came to Mai, Yuji could never understand exactly why he kept doing these unnecessary actions, as no matter how many times he analyzed the situation, he couldn't find any logic behind his own actions. But yet, he continued doing it anyway. However, while Yuji spent those days training and occasionally interacting with Junpei and his mother, there would be someone else observing everything from the background. And once they noticed it, a certain question began forming within their mind. What would happen if they interfered? The thought alone was enough to spark their curiosity, and unfortunately for everyone involved, that curiosity would soon have consequences, because fate was about to take a turn for the worst. As we will now do a change of scenes. Turning to the rain, which poured heavily from the night sky, we will see dark clouds as they covered the city overhead, while distant thunder occasionally echoed through the air. Standing amidst the storm would be a familiar abandoned building that served as the group's base, as rainwater would be dripping through the cracks in the damaged ceiling, while the old structure groaned quietly under the weather. As inside, we will see broken pillars as they stretched towards the ceiling, and pieces of the concrete littered the floor as rust covered the exposed metal supports, while puddles of water have formed throughout the building due to years of neglect, as the entire place felt cold yet lifeless. And then soon, we will hear the sound of footsteps as they soon echoed through the darkness, as Yuji Todori would then finally enter through the ruined entrance, as one hand would remain inside his pockets while the other carried a plastic bag filled with books. The covers revealed various scientific topics, just being physics, biology, neuroscience, and advanced mathematics, as Yuji had spent most of the day studying before conducting several dark matter experiments, and today had been intended to be another training session, a normal one at that. However, as he walked deeper into the building while his mind would be preoccupied, this is where suddenly a familiar voice would then call out from the darkness. "Welcome back, Yuji. So glad to see you return safe and sound." The voice sounded unusually cheerful, but Yuji immediately recognized it. Unfortunately, as his gaze shifted towards the darkness ahead, this is where Yuji will see none other than Mahito. You see, over the past several months that went by, Yuji has slowly come to understand something very simple. He disliked Mahito. Not because of any logical reason, not because Mahito interfered with the mission, but because every interaction with him left Yuji feeling annoyed in ways he couldn't properly explain. As soon stepping out from the said darkness, we will see Mahito as he appeared, his hands resting inside his pockets as a wide grin stretched across his face, as the expression looked almost amused, and heck even looked excited, as Yuji stared at him with his usual stoic expression. "What do you want, Mahito?" Mahito grinned after hearing this, as his grin would widen actually, as he immediately adopted an exaggerated sad expression. "What do you mean, Yuji? That really hurt my feelings, you know. Can't I just talk to a good friend of mine?" He would say as his shoulders slumped dramatically, but Yuji said nothing. He simply continued staring at him as several seconds would pass until eventually Mahito would then drop the act. The fake sadness disappeared immediately, as in its place appeared something much more genuine. Something wicked and cruel. Something that truly belonged to a curse. "Well, since you asked, I guess I wanted to show you my latest creation." "In fact, I think it's one of my best ones." He would finish speaking, as soon we would then see something that emerged from the darkness behind him. As Yuji's eyes would then shift towards it, this is where we will see it. A grotesque creature would then emerge, as its body resembled a massive spider formed from human flesh. With multiple arms and legs protruding from unnatural locations, we will see it as it would even have two faces, as both of them will be horribly twisted and malformed, as the creature would then release a distorted cry that echoed throughout the building, as it truly looked like something pulled directly from a nightmare. And Mahito would be there, eagerly watching Yuji's and waiting for any reaction at all, but Yuji just remained completely unexpressive. As Mahito seeing this would then click his tongue in annoyance before then casually walking closer until he stood beside Yuji, as the two would then suddenly observe the creature. "So, what do you think, Yuji?" Mahito would ask, his voice carrying clear amusement, while Yuji just remained silent. His gaze never left the creature as he had no care for it. Why would he care for... But this is when suddenly, the creature would then speak. "Yuji." Yuji froze as his eyes would widen slightly. The voice was distorted, broken, and barely recognizable, but he still knew it. He had flawless memory after all. And more importantly, it was because he heard it before. Several times, actually. As then the second voice would then speak up, calling out Yuji's name as well, as this one sounded older and weaker and filled with much more pain. As behind him, Mahito began laughing. "Oh? You recognize them?" I like to call this one mother and son. Maito would say, as he leaned forward slightly while a grin stretched across his face as he pointed towards the distorted creature in front of him. As silence would fill the building as Yuji finally understood. The creature that was before him was none other than Junpei and his mother, merged together and transfigured into a single existence. As for several moments, nobody would speak, as Yuji's face disappeared beneath the shadow of his hood. Meanwhile, Maito would then begin to enthusiastically explain how he created his amazing creation, as he were to call it, as he began to talk about how interesting the experiment had been, how he came up with the idea, how fascinating human souls were, and how entertaining the results had become. As to Maito, this was nothing more than a game, a project, a source of amusement, until Yuji would then finally interrupt him. Leave. Those would be the only words said as Maito then blinked. Huh? Leave. Yuji stood completely still while Maito then began laughing. What are you talking about, Yuji? You don't really want me to. But then suddenly he stopped. Instantly, pressure filled the building as an overwhelming killing attempt crashed through the air. As Maito's smile vanished, his body froze as every instinct inside of him screamed, "Run." His cursed instincts howled warning louder than ever before, as there was one thing that Maito could completely understand from all this: death. That was all that was sensed. As slowly we'll see Yuji as he turned his head and looked directly into Maito's eyes. And for the first time since Maito had ever met Yuji, his gaze was different. While they were normally cold and most of the time stoic, now they were empty and sharp. There was no confusion, no detachment, no indifference. Only absolute intent. Leave, Maito. Yuji repeated one more time as Maito moved. Immediately, without hesitation, without argument, without any sense of pride at all, he ran away as his body disappeared from the building as fast as possible, because he knew that if he did not leave at that very moment, Yuji Itadori would have killed him. As now that Maito had left the building, this is where we see the pressure as it would vanish immediately, as silence had returned once again in the ruined building, with rain continuing to fall from outside. As Yuji would simply stand motionless as he would then turn towards the transfigured human, as the creature could do nothing more but look back at him, this time with tears streaming down its faces, as it would simply call out to Yuji once again in the same broken yet distorted tone, as Yuji would just stare at it silently. Before then, 6 white wings would then emerge from his back, as the ruined building would become illuminated by their glow as countless particles of white dark matter would then drift through the air, as the creature would stare at the sight in awe, while Yuji just simply raised one hand and directed the dark matter towards it. As this is where we will see the creature as it will be enveloped completely in a white glow, as immediately Yuji began calculating. From the bones, to the muscles, to the organs, to the whole nervous system, as he begins to recall everything about the human body and more precisely about both Junpei and his mother. As Yuji would be flooded by countless calculations inside his mind, as the knowledge that he had accumulated over years of studying had finally been put to use. As dark matter had carefully began dismantling the transfigured human layer by layer, piece by piece, until slowly and carefully it started repairing it, reconstructing and restoring what was once before. Until eventually, after multiple minutes would then pass, we will see the dark matter disperse as 2 figures would then lay collapsed onto the floor. This being Junpei and his mother, as both of them had been restored completely and both of them were still alive. As Yuji would just silently observe both of them as his wings would then disappear, as several moments would then pass by, until eventually Junpei would then slowly open his eyes. The moment he does so, confusion would fill them instantly as he looks around wondering where he was, until finally the memories then returned. The memories of Maito, the transformation, the pain, as his breathing quickened, yet strangely enough, he felt calm, as it was almost as if his body was still processing the shock about everything that just happened. As Junpei would look at his hands in wonder before then turning towards Yuji and then questioning, How am I still alive? He would ask Yuji softly, with him simply responding that he restored their bodies using his technique, simplifying it while leaving out much more of the important details behind. as Junpei would just stare at him before then slowly lowering his head, as then tears began to form. I'm such an idiot. I really thought just because he didn't immediately pick on me like everyone else, that he was my friend. Even though he told me exactly what type of curse he was. Junpei would say as his voice shook. He clenched his fist tightly as tears would fall as his voice sounded near broken. All the while Yuji just listened quietly as Junpei felt both anger and guilt over the entirety of these events that happened, as he would just continue to break down crying for several minutes that passed. Until a groan would then come from nearby as Junpei would then immediately turn. As his mother would then slowly open her eyes as Junpei would immediately rush towards her side. Confusion filled her expression until eventually the memories would then return. Fear flashed across her face briefly before, oddly enough, she would also begin to feel calm. As you see, unaware by both the mother and the son, Yuji had been subtly using dark matter to stabilize their emotional states, all by manipulating the brainwave activities that caused them to feel certain fear and anxiety, as he dulled them out, allowing them to feel calm or at least not to break down completely. As while both Junpei and his mother did not know exactly why they felt this way, for now they simply accepted the feelings as Junpei rushed forward and embraced his mother, with tears still streaming down his face as he simply apologizes to her, apologized for complaining and apologizing for even dragging her into this mess, with his mother just simply hugging him tightly. As despite everything that happened, they were alive. And that alone was all that mattered. As Yuji now seeing the sight before him, he would then eventually turn away, as he begins walking further into the base before then stopping. As without looking back, he would then speak. I recommend leaving from here as far away as possible. I can't guarantee that Maito won't come after you again. So leave this place and never come back. You should have never got involved with us in the first place. He would declare as silence had filled the building. As eventually, after a while, we'll see Junpei's mother as she nodded. I understand. We'll leave. She would say, her tone sounding so serious that even catches Junpei off guard, as the two would then slowly begin to stand up and began walking towards the exit. But just before stepping outside, this is when Junpei's mother would then stop. As without turning around, she would then begin to speak up. Yuji, she would say, calling out to him, as Yuji hearing her would then pause before then looking towards her. I may not know what you're involved in, or who you're associated with, but that doesn't change the fact that you saved both me and my son. And for that, I thank you, she would declare as her voice had softened near the end as Yuji would remain silent. As here at this very moment, this is where she would then finally turn around, and when she does, we would then see the mesmerizing sight. As a gentle smile had rested on her face, a motherly one at that, as it would be filled with both warmth and affection, as while looking directly towards Yuji, this is when she would then declare towards him, you truly are a kind child. As Yuji, upon hearing this, his eyes would widen in shock, as despite experiencing all that she has experienced, and despite, already understanding that Yuji was linked to the person that did this, she still was somehow able to look at him like that, and was able to say such words, as Yuji felt both warmth and sadness at that very moment. As the sensation caught him completely off guard, yet outwardly, he would try his best not to let it affect him too much, as his expression would return to being stoic, but this time he turned away. You should go now. The longer you stay here, the less safe you will be, he would declare, his voice remaining calm, as Junpei's mother just smiled softly. Of course, I understand, she would say as she would then turn towards the exit with Junpei following besides her. But just before leaving, she would then look back one final time. Make sure to take care of yourself, Yuji. The words were simple, yet somehow, they struck harder than any attack ever had. As just like that, we'll see Junpei and his mother as they'll both leave the area, the sound of their footsteps gradually disappearing, leaving Yuji alone once again. As silence had filled the abandoned building once more, we will see rain as it continued to fall through the broken ceiling. All the while, Yuji stood motionless. He replayed her words in his mind, the warmth, the sadness, as currently right now, a strange feeling of loss had fell upon him. And he didn't understand any of it, but yet, for perhaps the first time in his life, Yuji found himself wishing something had turned out different. As Yuji's back faced the darkness of the abandoned building, as once again, just like how he was in the beginning, he was all alone. As this will be the last thing we will see before once again we will now do a time skip. Following the events that involve both Junpei and his mother, we will see the next several days as they pass by relatively quietly. Or at least, they did so on the surface. You see, the incident itself remained completely undisclosed to the rest of the group, as neither Kenjaku nor the other disaster curses learned about what truly happened that night, as the only individuals who knew the full details were both Yuji and Maito. And as a result, an unusual change began to occur between them. As to an outsider observer, very little seemed different. Maito still acted like his usual self. He continued making jokes, he continued speaking in his playful and cheerful manner, and whenever he encountered Yuji, he still treated him with the same casual familiarity he always had. However, if someone had paid close enough attention, they would notice small differences. It was subtle, but it was there. Things such as Maito himself likely wasn't even fully aware he was doing. You see, from now on, whenever he spoke to Yuji, there'd be an occasional but brief hesitation. And whenever Yuji looked at him directly, Maito would sometimes become slightly more cautious with his words. And most notable of all, Maito no longer went out of his way to provoke Yuji. As you see, the memory of that night remained firmly burned into his mind. The pressure, the killing intent, the overwhelming instinct that had screamed at him to run. As Maito had encountered many dangerous individuals before, yet what he experienced that night was something entirely different. And for perhaps the first time since meeting Yuji, Maito had genuinely been afraid of him. And as a result, while he still maintained his playful attitude towards him, there was now a small amount of caution mixed into every interaction. As to Maito, Yuji had become more unpredictable than he was before. Meanwhile, Yuji himself, he remained mostly unchanged. He continued carrying out missions, he continued training, he continued studying and refining dark matter. And outwardly, he maintained the same stoic and emotionless demeanor he always displayed. And to everyone in the group, Yuji appeared the exact same as before. However, if someone observed him carefully enough, they might have noticed something. As you see, whenever Maito was involved, Yuji's attitude had become noticeably colder. The difference was subtle, almost impossible to detect, but it existed. His responses become shorter, if that's even possible. His patience become thinner, and overall, whenever Maito spoke, Yuji just seemed far less willing to entertain his presence than before. It was not enough for most people to notice. In fact, nearly everyone remained completely unaware of the change. As Kenjaku, Jogo, Hanami, Dagon, none of them had even noticed any of this happening. To the rest of the world, Yuji was behaving completely normally. Everything appeared unchanged, everything appeared stable, and everything appeared exactly as it always was. Except for one person. As we will now do a change of scenes. Turning to the night, which has once again settled over a familiar forest, we will see it as a cool, gentle breeze occasionally passed through the area, causing the leaves overhead to rustle softly, as standing in the center of the clearing would be Yuji, as his hands rested inside his pockets while he quietly looked up at the moon. The silver light reflected faintly in his eyes, as for once his mind was unusually quiet. There were no calculations, no experiments, no theories regarding dark matter. There was nothing at all, just pure silence. As Yuji had simply stood there looking at the night sky for several moments until eventually the sounds of footsteps approaching would then finally break the stillness, as a familiar voice would then soon follow. Well, look at what we have here. I was wondering if I'd find you here again. Yuji briefly glanced towards the source, as walking into the clearing was none other than Mai. As her dark hair swayed slightly as she approached, her usual confident expression rested on her face, as Yuji just looked at her for a few moments before then returning his attention back towards the moon. As to him, this just seemed more normal. Mai would arrive, she would eventually begin complaining about something, he would listen, and that was usually how these meetings went. Everything seemed normal. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. At least, that's what Yuji had thought. Until then suddenly, the sound of quick footsteps approaching him had immediately caused him to then shift his attention. And before he could fully turn around, this is when a soft hand would then gently touch his cheek, as Yuji then froze. As currently at the present moment, we will see his face as it was carefully guided to the side, as his eyes would meet Mai's. And Yuji's eyes would widen slightly as Mai was now standing much closer than before, but more importantly, the expression on her face was now different. There was no annoyance, no teasing, no smug grin. Instead, she looked worried. Genuinely worried. "What's wrong?" she would say, her voice sounding so soft and concerned as for a brief moment silence had filled the clearing. As despite everyone around Yuji remaining unaware of the changes taking place within him, and despite Yuji himself failing to fully recognize them, there was one person who had noticed immediately. The one person who could even tell the difference. And that would be Mai. As to her, she knew Yuji, honestly, possibly even better than Yuji knew himself. So the difference for her was easily noticeable. As turning back to the scene, we will see Mai, she continued to look at Yuji with concern, while Yuji quickly returned to his usual expression, his face becoming emotionless once more. "Nothing," Yuji would declare, as Mai hearing this immediately frowned, as Yuji had attempted to look away. However, this is when suddenly, before he could even react, this is when Mai would then suddenly step forward, and then do something that even Yuji himself was not expecting, as she would wrap her arms around him before then pulling him into a warm embrace. As silence filled the clearing once again, as this time we will see Yuji as his eyes had widened. You see, for the first time in his life, someone had hugged him, and the sensation had caught him completely off guard. As the warmth and the closeness of feeling another person simply holding onto him, everything about it felt unfamiliar, yet somehow it wasn't unpleasant. It was strange, but oddly enough, it was comforting. As Yuji had remained completely still inside the embrace, unsure what he was supposed to do, while Mai didn't let go. Instead, she simply rested her head against his chest as several moments would then pass before she would eventually speak up. "You know, sometimes I wish you would talk to me too," she would say, her voice sounding unusually gentle as Yuji had remained silent while she continued. "Like, how are things going for you? What's going through your head? How's your day been? I genuinely want to know more about you. So, if you're feeling down or upset about something, open up to me, okay?" she would say as once again silence had filled the area. As when she went silent, Yuji would look down as even though her face was partially hidden against his chest, he could still see the faint redness spreading across her cheeks, as it was obvious to him that this wasn't easy for her. In fact, she was probably embarrassed, very embarrassed. But yet despite that, she still said it, and she said it for him. As Yuji now stood there, this is where memories would then slowly resurfaced. Of Junpei, his mother, the dinners they had together, the conversations, the warmth he felt while spending time with them, as for a long time Yuji hadn't understood what those moments meant. Until now, as he finally understood. Those moments had made him happy. The realization came naturally, and at the same time, another realization soon followed. Those moments were now gone. Junpei and his mother had left, and he would likely never see them again. As the thought caused an unfamiliar ache inside his chest, as Yuji had recognized it almost immediately, as this was sadness. As Yuji had, for perhaps the first time in a long time, had felt true sadness as realization had surprised him. Yet even then, no tears had appeared or no expression had formed, as outwardly Yuji had remained the exact same. Inside, however, things were different. And as he continued to stand within Mai's embrace, this is when, strangely enough, the warmth that he felt now reminded him of the warmth he had experienced while spending time with Junpei and his mother. Yet somehow, there was also something different. Something stronger and something he couldn't properly explain, As while Yuji didn't understand what that feeling was exactly, all he knew was that being here with Mai had made the sadness feel lighter. Not gone, but just easier to bear. As neither of them spoke after that, as there was no need to. The two simply just remained there beneath the moonlight, enjoying each other's comfort, as standing together within the quiet forest clearing, this will be the last thing we will see before once again we will then do another time skip. So now, following the events that occurred in the forest between both Yuji and Mai, we will now turn to see the next several days as they pass by without any major incidents happening, as life soon returned to its usual rhythm. As for Yuji, his days continue to be filled with training, studying and experimenting, and missions, as whenever he wasn't carrying out assignments for Kenjaku, Yuji could usually be found reading through scientific material, researching new concepts, or testing new applications for dark matter. And as a result, his strength continued to increase at a steady pace. However, while Yuji continued following his usual routine, there was another development quietly taking place during this period of time. This being the one that involved Mai Zenin. You see, following their conversation beneath the moonlight sky, we will see something between them had changed. Not drastically, and not enough for either of them to openly acknowledge it, but yet the change was there nonetheless. You see, while their interactions remained mostly the same as before, we will see that on the surface very little had changed, yet beneath it, a subtle difference had begun to emerge. You see, this fondness they held for one another became slightly easier to notice, not through grand gestures nor through dramatic confessions, but through small moments and simple actions, the kind that often went unnoticed by everyone except the people involved. As sometimes Mai would arrive carrying an extra drink and casually hand it to Yuji without explanations, and also sometimes Yuji would just quietly remember details from conversations that Mai herself had forgotten. And there were even nights where the two simply sat together beneath the moon without speaking much at all. And somehow, neither of them seemed bothered by the silence, as those small moments slowly accumulated over time, with neither realizing just how much they began to value the other's presence. As due to all this, as the days continue to pass, we will see the bond between them gradually grow stronger, without either of them even noticing it, as all this happened naturally. However, while these pleasant moments were happening, and as they continue to move on throughout the days that went by, we will see the world around them as it continued to move forward, and as it does so, the date that Kenjaku had set for Shibuya steadily approached. Plans continued to move in the background as preparations continued to be made, and unbeknownst to most people, events were slowly beginning to get set in motion that would eventually shake up the entirety of the Jujutsu world. As from here, we will now turn to the next several days that went by as we will see events begin to unfold in a similar manner to the main timeline. As you see, during the events that took place during the Kyoto Goodwill Exchange event, we end up seeing that while the entirety of Jujutsu High faced off against this threat that was Hanami, and while Gojo was locked outside, we will see Yuji as he'll be the one to actually go in there and retrieve the death paintings along with Sukuna's fingers from Jujutsu High. As Maito would not do it considering the fact that Kenjaku saw this as training for Yuji, and also Yuji's presence was still widely unknown throughout the entirety of the Jujutsu world, since Kenjaku basically was saving him up for the big day. However, during this time while this will be happening, and after Kenjaku and Maito would end up reviving Choso and his brothers, we end up seeing Yuji as during this time while Yuji's daily life remained largely unchanged, there would be something happening beneath it all. As beneath his calm exterior, something subtle had begun to strung up. As from time to time, Yuji would find himself remembering a certain conversation whenever he would look into the sky, as a single question would quietly echo inside his mind and for some reason would never leave him. What do you want to do with your life? You see, these would be the words that echoed in his mind as Mai's words refused to leave him. Whenever the thoughts resurfaced, Yuji would unconsciously stop whatever calculations he occupied in his mind, and he would just quietly stare towards the sky. And for a brief moment, he would begin to think to himself, what did he want? What did he truly desire? His entire life had been built around serving Kenjaku. His existence had always been resolved around completing missions and completing his objective. That was his purpose, or at least, that was what he had always believed. He would always remind himself that his existence held no value beyond fulfilling his assigned role, and that nothing else really mattered. But, you see, every time he repeated those thoughts in himself, they felt less convincing than before. The certainty that once existed within him slowly began to crack as a small doubt began to quietly form in his mind, one that Yuji himself struggled to understand. And sometimes while staring at the sky above him, he began to wonder if perhaps, and just perhaps, he wanted something different. Something that belonged to him alone. Something beyond endless training and missions. However, while that thought would disappear as quickly as it came, it always would eventually end up returning. Again and again. And while this quiet conflict slowly grew within Yuji, life around him continued as normal. At least for everyone else, except for one person. You see, since the moment he had been brought into existence, Choso had found himself acting strangely whenever Yuji was nearby. He couldn't explain it and he didn't understand it, but whenever he watched Kenjaku send Yuji out on another dangerous mission without the slightest concern for his well-being, irritation would quietly begin to build up inside him, as it simply felt wrong. Seeing Yuji treated like nothing more but a disposable tool stirred an unfamiliar anger inside Choso. And on more than one occasion, he even questioned Kenjaku's decisions, asking why Yuji wasn't being allowed to rest. However, Kenjaku hearing this would simply dismiss the concerns with a smile, yet Choso's unease never disappeared. And not only that, but whenever he looked at Kenjaku himself, he always felt a strange sensation, as something about the man bothered him deeply. He couldn't explain why, and he couldn't identify the source, but instinctively something inside him rejected Kenjaku's presence entirely. Now mind you, Kenjaku was still under the identity of Suguru Geto, but you see, Choso doesn't know that that's Kenjaku. But even so, Choso rarely voiced his thoughts as he remained mostly silent, watching, observing, and waiting, as he only cared about his brothers, who currently right now were watching over Sukuna's fingers and the rest of the death painting wounds. As you see, while these days would quietly begin to pass by, we will see unseen changes slowly begin to take root within several people at once, as these changes would soon alter the course of everything. And as the days came and went, we will see time steadily move forward until eventually we arrive at the present moment. As here, this is where we're now going to enter another scene. Turning to somewhere far beneath the surface, we will now see that hidden away from the outside world would be an underground chamber that rested in complete isolations. As we will see that inside the chamber, only a handful of dim lamps mounted along the walls, providing any light at all, as their weak glow would be barely reaching the center of the room. The atmosphere inside felt cold and heavy and almost suffocating, but while we were seeing this is where then the sound of footsteps then broke the silence, as two figures would then emerge from the darkness and walk calmly into the chamber. The first being Yuji, while the other was Suguru Geto, aka Kenjaku. As while these two would walk in, we will see neither of them stopping or neither of them showing a sign of concern, as they only came here for one purpose, this being to fulfill a promise. And across the chamber, we will see another figure quietly waiting. As wrapped almost entirely in bandages, with only his face remaining visible beneath the dim light, we will see his gaze as they remain fixated on the approaching pair. His expression steady despite the tension filling the room, as he had been waiting for this moment for years. As this would be none other than Koichi Muda, or better known as Megumi. You see, similar to the main timeline, he had entered a secret agreement with Kenjaku and his allies. In exchange for providing information regarding Jujutsu High and the movements of the sorcerers, they had promised something that no one else in the world could offer: a healthy body. And you see, since birth, Megumi had always lived trapped inside a body that constantly betrayed him, one so frail that even sunlight could burn his skin. But finally, today would be the day that everything would change. Or so he thought. As you see, turning to the chamber itself, you'll see Geto as he stops several meters away from Megumi before then calmly glancing towards Yuji. "You may begin now," he would declare, as Yuji hearing this would give a silent nod, as without another word he would then step forward. As the very moment he does so, this is where countless calculations begin to flood his mind. You see, every single flaw within Megumi's body was instantly mapped out and analyzed through dark matter, and within seconds the solution had already been calculated, as then 6 brilliant white wings would then unfold from Yuji's back, as it spread outward with a silent elegance, illuminating the chamber in a soft white glow, as countless glittering particles drifted into the air around him. The darkness itself seemed to retreat as Megumi's eyes widened, as even after hearing about Yuji's strange technique from Geto, witnessing it with his own eyes almost felt unreal, and it looked less like cursed energy and more like something divine. As behind him, we will see Geto as he simply watched in silence as his smile never faded. As here we will see Yuji as he slowly raises his hands as the countless white particles were then directed towards Mekamaru, as within moments his entire body would then disappear beneath the brilliant white light. The chamber itself seemed to vanish beneath the radiance, as inside the glow we will see Yuji as he continued calculating, as dark matter was spread through Mekamaru's body, calculating and seeing every single flaw while also beginning to do repairs, as every damaged muscle would be regenerated, along with every single other damage that was within his body, as every flaw that Mekamaru had within him since birth was all getting fixed up at the same time, as the impossible was being rewritten into reality. And so for several moments this will continue to pass until eventually the light will then slowly fade away, as darkness will once again reclaim the chamber. And when they do, we will then see the bandages that were covering Mekamaru's body as they slowly unravel before falling harmlessly against the floor. As the sickly body that once had imprisoned him his entire life was now truly gone. And in his place stood a perfectly healthy young man, as Mekamaru would then slowly lift his hand into the air, his fingers moving effortlessly as his arms obeyed without any pain. His breathing caught inside his throat as disbelief overtook him entirely, as he felt shocked, as for the first time in his life, his body was finally able to keep up with him. As he would remain frozen in awe, just silently staring at himself, as Yuji would just simply step backwards. His rings remained unfolded behind him as the glowing particles slowly drifted through the chamber. Then, this is when the sound of applause began to echo through the room, as Gojo would then approach with a satisfied smile. "Oh, well done, Yuji. It seems your training continued to bear fruit," he would say, his voice carrying genuine approval, but Yuji offered no response, his expression never changing, as the praise honestly meant nothing to him right now. As Gojo then shifts his gaze towards Mekamaru as the smile on his face remained calm. "Well then, now that we have fulfilled our side of the agreement, you understand what's going to happen next, don't you?" he would say, as the meaning behind his words needed no explanation. The atmosphere immediately changed as Mekamaru remained silent for several moments before then slowly lowering his hands. He flexed his fingers once more as he then stretched his shoulders, as his body moved perfectly, as then a faint smile would then cross his face. "Yep, I do," he would say, as his answer was calm, but the second that he says this, the chamber would then suddenly begin to tremble. Heavy mechanical sounds began to echo from every direction as stones scraped against metal, as the darkness surrounding the chamber began to move. As soon we will see that one after another, enormous mechanical puppets began to emerge from the shadows, as these towering machines will be covered in armor stepping into the light as their eyes glowed with cursed energy, as dozens upon dozens of them would appear with cannons being rotated into positions. As the very moment that these Mekamarus would then appear, this is when suddenly the main one would then look directly towards Gojo and then Yuji. "Now that our deal has been completed, there's no longer any reason for me to hold back," he would say, as silence had once again answered him, as Gojo would just simply smile, as even while standing before an army capable of leveling the entire chamber without any hesitation, we will see not even a hint of tension had appeared on his face, as instead, he would then calmly turn around and begin to walk towards the exit. As while his footsteps would then echo slowly behind him, this is where he would then turn towards Yuji. "I'll leave this to you, okay, Yuji? Just make sure not to take too long," he would say, as the dismissal was absolute. You see, to Gojo, Mekamaru wasn't worthy of his attention. He wasn't even close. But the moment that those words were spoken, this is when Mekamaru would then roar, as an entire army would then immediately spring into actions, with several combat puppets accelerating forward, rocketing through the chamber as they attempt to rush past Yuji and intercept Gojo. But you see, the very moment that the distance between them vanished, this is when suddenly a loud boom would then go off, as the entire chamber would then shake as the charged puppets would then explode all at the same time into countless fragments of twisted metal. As while this ends up happening, we will see the silence return as the main Mekamaru, who I'm just going to call Muda by this point since, I'm pretty sure you already know who I'm talking about, as Muda's pupils would then shrink a little bit as he couldn't believe what just happened. As slowly, this is when his eyes would then be directed towards Yuji as he hadn't seen him move, not even once. But somehow, some way, Yuji had been able to take care of all those puppets in a matter of milliseconds. As without looking back towards Gojo, Yuji would just simply answer to his commands with a simple, "understood." As the words had barely left his mouth before once again the 6 white wings would once again expand behind his back. their pale glow illuminating the chamber once again as the white particles drifted slowly through the darkness like falling stars. And Muda instinctively took a step back as every remaining puppet shifted its attentions towards Yuji. Cannons aims, blades locking into place as cursed energy surged throughout the chamber, as the air itself grew heavier. As here, this is where the battle between Mechamaru and Yuji will now begin. So now beginning the fight, we will see Kokichi's arm as he will be shot forward, as every remaining Mechamaru puppet would then respond immediately, as his voice would then echo across the battlefield as he orders them to attack Yuji. As soon we will see dozens of mechanical heads simultaneously open their mouths, as crimson curse energy rapidly condensed inside each one, growing brighter and brighter until the air itself seems to tremble from overwhelming pressure, before then a loud boom would then go off, as dozens of beams began to erupt all at once as he attacked toward through the air like streaks of light, illuminating the battlefield before converging towards a single target, Yuji, as he remained perfectly still with his hands never leaving his pockets. His expression never changed, as despite the attack approaching him, we will see him look at it as if it was nothing, as instead Yuji would just mentally think, "It's pointless." As he'll say this as if it was a simple fact, as the very next instance we'll see the countless beams as they swallowed him whole, as a defining explosion shook the entire chamber, destroying it as stone shattered and the earth cracked apart. As soon we'll see an enormous cloud of smoke and dust erupt into the air, engulfing everything in front of Kokichi's army. And the shockwave alone flattened nearby trees and reduced the remains of the underground chamber into a rubble. As for several seconds, nothing could be seen, only smoke and silence. Then, we would then see the smoke as it slowly drifted away, as standing at its center would be none other than Yuji, who was completely unharmed as not a single scratch had marked his body, and not even the fabric of his hoodie had been damaged. He simply stood there exactly as he was before, with his hands still resting inside his pockets, as the white particles drifting from his wings gently floated around him. And all the while his emotionless eyes would then shift towards where Kokichi was originally been standing. But now the young sorcerer was gone. As Yuji's expression remained unchanged, this is when he didn't even search or didn't even hesitate, because at that very moment, another explosion would then erupt, as every remaining Mechamaru puppet would then charge simultaneously, from every direction, from above, from below, from even behind, as an endless mechanical swarm surged towards Yuji. But yet, even with all of them approaching him, it didn't matter. The results ended the exact same way. As soon a massive explosion would then erupt once again, as the ground collapsed beneath the impact. The towering pillars of stone crumbled as dust and debris consumed everything as the surrounding landscape was reduced to ruin. And for a brief moment the entire battlefield vanished beneath the smoke until eventually it would then finally burst through. As we will see a streak of white light then shoot across the sky as Yuji soared upwards. His six white wings spread wide behind him as they scattered countless glowing particles through the morning air, as he flew effortlessly and calmly without the slightest bit of urgency. Meanwhile, beneath him, we will see several surviving Mechamaru puppets as they emerge from the smoke, as they will rock into the sky after him with their jets igniting across their backs, as they accelerated with incredible speed, attempting to surround him from every direction, as one came from above, while two from below, and a third from behind, as several more would then approach from the sides, as within seconds, Yuji would find himself completely encircled. Yet, in front of all of this, his expression never changed. His body just moved as if it was on instinct alone, as we will see him slip between the incoming attacks as if they were nothing. As every single time Yuji would then dodge these attacks effortlessly, we will see the puppets as they continue pursuing after him relentlessly. But yet despite the distance rapidly closing, Yuji just casually was able to avoid them, until eventually he would then suddenly stop, as the charged puppets would then suddenly reach him from every direction. And yet at that exact moment, this is when suddenly every last one of them would then be simultaneously destroyed, as a loud explosion would then occur, as the mechanical limbs would then spun downward while the armor plates would then shatter apart instantly. As for a brief moment, we would then see the glowing white particles as they could be seen drifting from inside the destroyed machines before calmly floating back towards Yuji. As you see, Yuji at that exact moment, he had already used his dark matter and manipulated it to go inside the mechanical puppets, destroying them from the inside, causing them to be destroyed all at the same time. As it was something that was usually extremely hard to do considering how much precision you need, but for someone like Yuji, it was nothing at all. It was little to no difficulty whatsoever. As now turning back to Yuji once again, we will see him just casually hovering above the ruined landscape as the wind gently moved his hoodie. And while his wings continued to release a stream of shimmering white particles into the air, this is when he would then look down. As right there at that very moment, this is when suddenly the earth shook. As soon we would then see a deep mechanical rumble then echo across the landscape. As soon we would then see a massive shadow begin to slowly emerge from within. As soon we would then see it. a gigantic machine continuing to rise higher and higher until its full body towered over the battlefield itself. The steam erupted from countless vents across its armored frame, while cursed energy surged throughout his body like a flowing magma. Its eyes ignited with brilliant light, as it is where Kokichi's voice would then echo across the battlefield, as he announces his ultimate Mekamaru mode absolute. The declaration thundered through the air, as inside the colossal machine, we will see Kokichi as he tightly gripped the control mechanisms surrounding him. The multiple monitors displaying Yuji from every angle, you will see his face as it remained tense as sweat began to slowly roll down his forehead. Damn. I thought my puppets would at least keep him occupied for a little bit longer. Shit, I'm gonna have to finish him off quickly. He would mutter to himself as you see from the moment that Yuji had entered the underground chamber, Kokichi had understood exactly what kind of monster stood before him, as the overwhelming curse energy radiating from the boy alone was enough to rival the greatest sorcerers alive in the current decade. But right now, after witnessing the unknown technique with his own eyes, had already erased any remaining doubts that he already thought in his mind. As currently right now, only one simple fact stood out to Kokichi inside his mind, the one that stood above all else. The person that he was facing right now was someone who stood on the level of the special grades, and perhaps even beyond them, rivaling even the likes of ToAru Gojo. But yet, despite understanding the impossible gap between them, Kokichi never considered retreating. His resolve never wavered because he wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for so much more than that. As having that thought in mind, we will see Kokichi as he gritted his teeth inside the cockpit before once again resolving himself. As mentally, he will begin to go over every single strategy he can think of in his mind in order to take down Yuji. And while there wasn't really many, he did have one that could possibly work. If I can just find one opening, one moment where he lowers his guard, then I can erase him with enough curse energy. That was the best thought he had in mind, as currently right now, he was inside a machine that stored up multiple years upon years of his suffering into curse energy. And currently right now, he was planning to use it to its maximum potential in order to get rid of the threat before him. As with determination filling his eyes and failure no longer being an option, this is where Kokichi would then make his final stand. As high above the shattered trees, we will see Yuji as he quietly observed the massive machine below. His expression never changed, as within his mind, calculations began to expand effortlessly. As he begins to look at the machine before him, he is able to dissect it instantly due to the effects of dark matter. And currently right now, he was actually pretty impressed by it. However, even then, it didn't really mean too much to him. It's because even despite the overwhelming curse energy radiating from the ultimate Mekamaru, it still wasn't enough to deal with Yuji, as it remained irrelevant to the one who stood above all. As looking down at the huge machine, Yuji would just finally give Mekamaru one small piece of advice. Give up. You cannot win. Continuing this battle will only be a waste of energy and the results will not change. It's that simple. He would say, his words echoing across the ruined forest as his gaze never shifted. There was no arrogance within his voice, only pure fact and logic, as there was one truth that Kokichi can never escape. It's the simple fact that if he were to continue this fight with Yuji, he will die. However, even when being faced with this fact, Kokichi did not give up. Instead, he continued to fight on, as using the ginormous Mekamaru, we will see him continuously begin to fight Yuji, with Yuji himself not understanding why Kokichi continued to resist. As for the next following moments, we would then see the two of them as they continuously fought against each other, with the area and the terrain around them just being continuously destroyed by their attacks, or more precisely, Mekamaru's attacks, considering the fact that Yuji was just able to cancel them or just simply avoid them. But yet, despite all these attacks seeming pointless in Yuji's eyes, Kokichi just continued attacking and continued giving it all he's got. As all of this just causes Yuji to be more and more confused until eventually, this is where he begins to question Kokichi, why does he continue fighting? And the answer he gave him was honestly surprising. As after once again missing another attack, we will see Kokichi as he began to speak about his friends, about how much he wants to protect them, how much he wants to meet them, wants to laugh with them, wants to stand beside them, and wants to truly spend time with them. As after being locked up for so many years, Kokichi finally had an opportunity to live his life to the fullest, and he was not going to waste it. And if he has to get past both Yuji and Gato in order to do so, then so be it. As upon saying all this, we will see Kokichi as he releases another blast towards Yuji using the massive Mekamaru. Meanwhile, Yuji himself just remained motionless, tanking the attack as if it was nothing, but the words would enter his ears as they lingered inside his mind. As hearing everything that Kokichi had to say, Yuji had found himself once again remembering something else, as Mai's voice would then once again resurface as she questions what does he want to do with his life. As those words will once again resurface inside his head, as for a brief instant, this is where Yuji for the first time would actually freeze mid-action. As seeing this opportunity, this is when Kokichi would then announce his next attack, and the final one at that, as he releases a miracle cannon. As soon, we will then see a colossal pillar of cursed energy then erupt from the ultimate Mechamaru's mouth, as it will consume everything in its path, as it will be rushing directly towards Yuji, attempting to swallow him whole. Meanwhile, Yuji, we will see him as he finally begins to move once again. As slowly yet calmly, we will see Yuji as he finally removes one hand from his pocket, before then extending a single finger towards the incoming beam. As the very instant that he does this is when suddenly the overwhelming cursed energy that was sent flying towards him will then suddenly stop advancing. It trembled before then it will then be pushed backwards, as though striking an invisible wall as the miracle cannon began to distort and then collapse. As the very attack that Kokichi had sacrificed everything to create was now completely overwhelmed by an unseen force. As his eyes widened, as the only thing he can think in his mind was that it was impossible. But unfortunately for Kokichi, that was the last thing he was going to think at the moment, as it is when, without any hesitation, the miracle cannon was shattered along with the ultimate Mechamaru, as the giant machine would then suddenly be sent flying and destroyed, as the enormous construct that had taken years to create ceased to exist within seconds. As the shockwave tore across the forest, this is where we see countless trees as they begin to collapse, while the earth cracked apart as rocks and debris were launched hundreds of meters into the air. And from within the explosion, we will see Kokichi's body as it was violently thrown through the trees, as he crashed through one tree, then another, as until eventually his body just finally rolled across the broken ground, as he no longer had any strength to move as blood stained his clothes while his vision began to blur. But yet, as his consciousness began to fade, we will see one final thought begin to enter his mind, this being the memories of all his friends, along with just the images of all of them smiling together, and more importantly, Miwa. As seeing her one last time, this is where Kokichi would then have one last thought, as he would just simply apologize to her. As with that, this is where we would then see him as his eyes slowly closed before once again everything became silent. As now turning back to the ruined battlefield, we would then see the remains of the ultimate Mechamaru as it burned quietly beneath the morning sky. And for several moments, we'll see nothing remain out of place until finally footsteps begin to approach. As soon emerging from the smoke will be none other than Yuji, as just like always, his clothes remained untouched, as not a single scratch covered his body, as his wings slowly unfolded behind him. And as he stopped beside Kokichi's unconscious body, this is when he would then look down. As you see, after looking down at him for several moments, this is where he would then begin to recall Kokichi's words, his resolve, his promises about wanting to see his friends, and how he was planning to live this life to the fullest. As recalling Kokichi's words causes Yuji to once again remember Mai's question to him, this being, what does he want to do with his life? As hearing that question in his mind, Yuji just silently stared at the unconscious owner of the Mechamaru that had just been destroyed. And for years, he had followed orders without hesitation. Every mission, every command, and every kill, he had never questioned it. Until now. As soon, we would then see something surprising as white particles would then drift from his wings, as dark matter would then quietly surround Kokichi's body, repairing everything that had just been damaged due to their fight. As the very moment that this continued on for several moments later, we would then see Kokichi as his breathing had stabilized, as once again his body had been healed completely to 100%, as he now rested calmly on the ground, this time with a light smile on his face. As Yuji just looked at him one final time before then turning away. His wings spread once more as with a single motion he ascended into the sky, and as he would be in the sky, once again that question would enter his mind. But this time, instead of Mai saying it, it will be Yuji now questioning himself. What do I want to do with my life? The thought lingered as without another word he would then vanish into the morning sky, as from here this is where we're now going to turn to the next following events that would pass by. As following the battle between both Yuji and Kokichi, we would then see events as they begin to play similar to the main timeline. As Jujutsu High already began suspecting that there had been a traitor within their ranks, and ever since the attack during the Goodwill Exchange event, we would see the faculty as they had been quietly investigating every possible lead before eventually they then came to the conclusion that it was Kokichi. However, due to their investigation, they would then send several sorcerers to where he was, and when they eventually found his hideout after tracking it for a very long time, this is when they would then be greeted by the aftermath of the battle that had taken place, as many of them were stunned into silence trying to process what exactly even caused the destruction to happen in the first place, but eventually after regaining their composure, they would immediately begin searching until eventually they found Kokichi. As despite being unconscious beneath a tree, and even though it looked as though he was supposed to be damaged and everything, he looked to be in perfect health, as there was not a single injury on his body, despite everything else pointing to the fact that he had been in a fight. As although this led to many questions for the Jutsu sorcerers, they still nonetheless decided to take him back for questioning, and wait for him to at least wake up in order to start asking him all these questions. Meanwhile, turning to Yuji, we will see him once again step back into the abandoned hideout that served as a base for Kenjaku's group. And as he was there, we will see him as he immediately begins to fall back to his usual routine, this being to continue his training. As October 31st was steadily approaching and Gojo was making sure to have everything ready, it wanted Yuji to be at the best of his abilities, giving him no more free time to do so. But you see, while Yuji would just quietly obey his words, this is where unbeknownst to Gojo, or more precisely Kenjaku, Yuji had once again had something going on inside of him. A change. As for the first time since his childhood, Yuji had found himself unable to fully concentrate on his training. His calculations would stop midway, and his thoughts would drift somewhere else, as again and again his mind had returned to the same memories. He had spared Kokichi. He remembered the countless evenings he had spent meeting Mai beneath the moonlight, the dinner he shared with Junpei and his mother, and the decision to save them, and the choice to ignore Kenjaku's orders, as each memory resurfaced without warning, interrupting the perfect logic that had always guided his actions. It all made no sense to Yuji. By every conclusion that Yuji could reach, his behavior had been irrational. He had acted without any efficiency, without necessity, and without purpose, but yet he still chose to do it. And the contradiction really lingered within him, as Yuji had always believed that his own existence held no meaning beyond completing the mission that Kenjaku had given him. He was a tool created for a single purpose, and once that purpose was fulfilled, nothing else should matter. And that belief had never been questioned until now. As now turning to the night which had settled over the city, we will now see it as we will see cars begin to flow steadily through the streets while crosswalks filled and emptied into endless rhythm. As even at this hour, the city refused to slow down, as there was an unmistakable peace within it all. As far above the bustling district and standing alone on top of a rooftop will be none other than Yuji. As once again ignoring Kenjaku's order, we will see him actually slacking off on his training, or rather not slacking off but taking a break from it as he silently watched everything below. The wind gently tugged at his hoodie as he stood near the edge while his hands rested inside his pockets, and his expression remained emotionless as ever as without moving his eyes slowly traveled across the city beneath him. The countless lights, the passing cars, and even more importantly, the families enjoying time together. As seeing people just simply living, we will see him trying to observe every single detail without another word, as silence would once again fill the area. But then soon, from behind him, we will then see something move. As from the darkness, we will then see a cursed spirit as it will slowly emerge. As seeing the opportunity, we will then see as it lunged directly towards Yuji, thinking of him as nothing more but another poor victim that was about to fall victim to it. But unfortunately for the cursed spirit, things were not going to go exactly as it expected. As it was when suddenly a crimson spear would then burst through its chest. As the impact stopped the curse instantly, as his body would then shake a little bit before eventually the blood spear would then explode outward, tearing the spirit apart from the inside as the curse disintegrated into black ash before it even reached Yuji. As silence had returned once again onto the rooftop, this is where Yuji would, without turning around, would then begin to speak up. "You know I could sense him approaching, right? There was no need for you to do that," he would say, as for a moment no one would respond, until eventually footsteps began to echo across the rooftop, as then emerging from the shadow would be none other than Choso, as he would then stop beside Yuji. "That doesn't matter. More importantly, what does is the fact that you're out here this late. You know you could catch a cold, right?" he would say, as he would walk towards Yuji while Yuji didn't respond. He in fact just continued watching the city below as though he hadn't heard him. But as the silence began to stretch between them, this is when Yuji would then begin to question, how did they do it? The question came so quietly that the wind nearly carried it away, but Choso still blinked. "What? How do humans do it?" Yuji would say, as there was no mockery in his tone, only genuine confusion. How are they able to live their lives without being given any sense of direction or purpose? He would question, as for the first time since Choso had met Yuji, Yuji had sounded so lost. As Choso's expression would then subtly change as he followed Yuji's gaze towards the city below. As he could see it all, the families, the strangers, people whose lives continued without anyone ordering them around. As Yuji continued speaking, it doesn't make sense. Most of their decisions are irrational. They waste their times, they're pursuing things with no guaranteed outcome, and they care about people despite knowing they'll eventually lose them. Yet, they continue forward. What drives them? He would question as a small pause would then begin to follow as his eyes remained fixated on the light below. As the rooftop would become silent once again, as the only distant sounds would be that of the city that filled the air. As after several moments, this is where Yuji would then begin to speak up for one final time. Hey Choso, how exactly is someone supposed to live their life? He would say, as this time there would be something almost childlike in his voice as the question hung between them. And Choso, he didn't answer immediately. He in fact just leaned lightly against the rooftop railing as his eyes drifted across the endless city below him as he searched for the right words, until eventually he found them. I can't answer that for you. That's something only you can decide, he would say, his voice sounding calm yet honest, as Yuji lowered his eyes. He only quietly listened as another silence would settle over the rooftop, before then Choso would then smile faintly. I can't speak for everyone else, but I just want to live peacefully with my brothers. Nothing more, nothing less, he would say. And that's okay. Yuji's eyes widened ever so slightly as he slowly turned towards Choso, who continued watching the city below. The way I see it, there isn't a single correct way to live life. We were all brought into this world without knowing who we were and without knowing what we're supposed to become. But maybe that's the point. Because nobody knows, we're free to search for our own answers, free to decide what matters to us, and free to choose what kind of life we want. And you don't need someone else to decide that for you, he would say, as silence would fill the area as Yuji would then lower his gaze. He quietly thought over every word as the city continued moving beneath them. And life continued to carry on as after several long moments, this is where Yuji would then turn away from the edge of the rooftop. As he began walking towards the exit, but just before disappearing into the darkness, he would then stop. As without looking back, he would then say one last thing to Choso. This being, thank you. As with that being the last thing that Yuji says, this is where from this point we are now going to do another time skip. So now, following Yuji's conversation with Choso, we will look to see the next few days as they would pass by. As during this time, we will see Kenjaku and his allies as they spent that time making the final preparations for their plan that they have been building towards for the following months. As every curse spirit was assigned its role, every movement was carefully calculated, and every piece had finally been placed upon the board. Until finally, October 31st would then arrive. The day that would forever change the modern Jujutsu world. As similar to the main timeline, we will see a massive current then begin to descend over Shibuya, as its barriers stretch across the district, trapping thousands of unsuspecting civilians within its confines, while preventing ordinary people from escaping. Panic quickly spread throughout the streets. Confusion consumed the crowds as people desperately searched for answers, unaware that they had become unwilling participants in a battle hidden from the eyes of the world, as everything appeared to be unfolding exactly as Kenjaku had predicted. Until it wasn't. As almost the moment that the current had descended, we will see multiple figures suddenly reveal themselves from throughout Shibuya. This being Jujutsu sorcerers. As one after another would then emerge among the civilians, immediately beginning the evacuation efforts while engaging the cursed spirits that began to appear throughout the district. As the response had come much sooner than anticipated, as for the first time since the operation had begun, Kenjaku was genuinely caught off guard. You see, unlike in the main timeline, where Mekamaru had died facing off against Mahito, in this timeline, due to the fact that Mekamaru had survived due to Yuji sparing him, this allowed Kokichi to not only successfully be recovered from Jujutsu High, but also be taken to custody for questioning. as this is where he would then begin to inform them about Kenjaku's plans, and basically everything that led to their objective in Shibuya, along with the day of operation. Now, even though some of the detail had remained incomplete, since obviously Kenjaku is not going to tell Mekamaru everything, it still was enough detail to give Jujutsu High enough time to prep in order to prepare for the event that was coming. And as a result, the moment the current had appeared over Shibuya, the sorcerers were already there, waiting. As Kenjaku slowly observed the battlefield as more and more sorcerers revealed themselves across the district, this is where for a brief moment surprise would then cross his face. Before then, he smiled. As rather than frustration, excitement welled up within him. The variables had changed, the outcome had become less certain, but to him that only made the game more entertaining. As without hesitation, Kenjaku then ordered the operation to proceed, as immediately we will then see an all-out battle begin to fall upon Shibuya. As the disaster curses then entered the battlefield, along with Choso and his brothers, and countless accursed spirits begin to flood into Shibuya, turning the district into complete chaos. As immediately, while the battles would then erupt throughout the cities, and as this would continue to go on for several minutes, with both sides continuing to exchange blows with neither able to gain the advantage, this is when suddenly everything would then finally change. As a single figure would then step into Shibuya. With white hair and a blindfold, we will see an overwhelming presence then instantly silence the battlefield, as Satoru Gojo had arrived just at the nick of time. As the moment the strongest sorcerer of the modern era entered the curtain, we will see the balance of power inside the curtain then shift completely. The cursed spirits that moments ago been fighting fearlessly had now instinctively hesitated. Even experienced combatants felt the overwhelming pressure radiating from his mere presence, as hope began to spread through the ranks of Jujutsu sorcerers as the strongest had arrived. But while everyone else saw salvation, Kenjaku simply smiled, because he already had the perfect counter just waiting for him. As now turning to Gojo, we will see him as he stepped into Shibuya as he was greeted by the chaos, as smoke rose from the shattered buildings and explosions echoed throughout the district, while panicked civilians desperately pushed through the crowded streets, searching for any route that would lead to safety. And above them, we will see the cursed spirits as they begin to descend upon the helpless masses, while Jujutsu sorcerers threw themselves into battle to keep the casualties from climbing up even higher. As every direction was filled with conflict and chaos, as every second someone was fighting for their life, as Shibuya had become a complete and utter battlefield. And as Gojo's gaze swept across the destruction, his usual carefree smile was nowhere to be found, as his expression hardened. Shit. Looks like things have gotten out of hand. I better take care of this quickly, he would say. As without hesitation, this is when he would then step forward. As the instant he did, every cursed spirit and cursed user nearby instinctively shifted their attention towards him. And immediately we would then see the cursed spirits as they would be the first to attack. But you see, even though they would attack him, it would all be pointless, as no matter what attacks they threw at him, they would never reach him, as everything stopped just mere inches away from his body due to his ability known as Infinity. As no matter how overwhelming the attacks appeared, the invisible space between Gojo and the outside world remained absolute, as not a single strike could bridge the distance. And Gojo himself didn't even seem bothered or slowing down, as in the very next instant he would then vanish, as a sonic boom would then erupt throughout the streets. As before anyone could react, dozens of cursed spirits would then suddenly be split apart, their bodies dissolving into ash almost simultaneously, as the cursed users suffered no better fate. As one after another, they began to collapse unconscious before they even realized they had been struck. As just like that, endless swarms of them that had been fighting had almost ended up being defeated almost immediately, as silence briefly spread across the section of Shibuya as the nearby sorcerers stared in disbelief. Then, relief washed over them. Hope immediately spread throughout their ranks, as moments ago they had been desperately trying to survive. Now, it seemed as though victory was guaranteed, as the sorcerers renewed their assault with fresh determination, forcing the remaining cursed spirits further back, along with the cursed users working with Kenjaku. Meanwhile, Gojo, he simply continued walking deeper into Shibuya, until suddenly, a torrent of flames then burst towards him from his right, as the inferno swallowed the entire street whole, yet just before reaching him, the flames would then abruptly stop, as Infinity held them in place. As soon, we will see the fire as it slowly dispersed, revealing the one responsible as it will be none other than Jogo, standing several dozens meters away near the entrance to the subway station. As Gojo immediately recognized him, remembering the curse that escaped him that one time. As for a moment, the two just simply stared at one another until then, unexpectedly, Jogo would then turn around. As without a single word, he simply sprinted directly into the subway entrance, causing Gojo to frown. A spirit running away from me? Well, that's a first. he began to say, as he had expected for it to continue attacking him just like last time. Still, that didn't mean that he was just simply gonna let him go. Jogo was a special grade, no doubt, and allowing him to disappear into the city wasn't an option. So without hesitation, Gojo activated his technique. As soon we will see the space around him destroy, as in the very next instance, he would then disappear. As a heartbeat later, we will see Gojo as he reappeared inside the subway station, but the difference was immediate. As we will see darkness, as every light inside the station had been extinguished for some weird reason, as the only illumination came from the faint emergency lights lining the distant walls. As the once busy station had become eerily silent, as not a single civilian remained, and not a single sound echoed throughout the tunnel. Well, that's strange. I know I saw him coming down here, Gojo would say as he slowly looked around, his voice quietly echoing throughout the empty station as his 6 eyes searched every corner of the underground platform. But yet nothing was there. No trace of Jogo, no trace of cursed energy, nothing at all. As the entire situation causes Gojo to have an odd chill go down his spine, as something felt wrong, far too wrong. Then, without another word, this is when a soft white glow would then appear behind him. It wasn't violent nor overwhelming, but it was almost divine, as the pale light would then slowly illuminate the dark subway platform as countless tiny white particles drifted through the air like falling stars. As Gojo seeing all this, his body would then immediately freeze. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him. Someone was standing right behind him. As without hesitation, Gojo would then spun around. In the very same motion, he would also tore away the blindfold from his face, as when he does, this is when the brilliant blue eyes would then immediately lock onto the figure standing only a few meters away. And for the first time in years, Satoru Gojo felt genuine confusion. As standing before him was a boy who looked no older than 15 or 16 years old, as a black hoodie concealed much of his face beneath his shadow, while behind him extended 6 immaculate white wings. As this would be none other than Yuji, as the scene felt unreal. Gojo's 6 eyes instinctively analyzed everything before him. The boy's cursed energy, his presence, his technique. But yet even though he read all this, it was as though the person standing before him simply didn't exist. What am I looking at? Gojo would think. However, just as he thinks this though, this is when suddenly his thoughts would then be interrupted. As you see, for the second time since awakening the 6 eyes, they would fail him. As suddenly, a sharp sensation would then suddenly shoot through his right arm as Gojo would feel pain. His eyes widened as he instinctively looked down, and when he does, he would then see that his arm was gone, cleanly severed off his shoulders as blood splattered across the station floor. There had been no warning, no movement, no cursed energy fluctuating, no attack for Infinity to intercept. As one moment his arm had been there, and the very next it wasn't. As Gojo immediately leapt backwards, creating distance between himself and the mysterious boy as he used reverse curse technique immediately, as within seconds his missing arm had completely regenerated as Gojo slowly flexed his restored fingers, but his gaze never left the figure standing across from him as the playful confidence that he usually defined himself had now completely disappeared. As his expression became serious, as for the first time in a very long time, Satoru Gojo understood that he was facing an opponent unlike any other he had encountered before, as this caused him to have a faint reminder of a certain someone with no cursed energy, but now it was different. As without another word, cursed energy began to surge throughout his body as his stance lowered. His fist titan, as the strongest sorcerer of the modern era, was the first to make the move. As drawing cursed energy into his right hand, he would then look towards the boy floating silently in front of him. Well then, before we start this, I think we should properly introduce ourselves, don't you think? The cursed energy gathering into his palm rapidly compressed, as within seconds it formed into a simple small blue orb that distorted everything around it. Loose pieces of concrete, metal, and debris were immediately dragged towards it, crushed by its overwhelming attraction. As a grin spread across Gojo's face, as this is when he would then announce, "Named Satoru Gojo. The strongest," he would say as he raises his hands towards Yuji, and without hesitation he would then release the technique. "Curse technique lapse. Blue," he would declare as the sphere of compressed energy would then shoot forward, as the surrounding area of the subway entrance would then be pulled into it, getting crushed by the massive force within it as the attack raced directly towards Yuji, who did not move. As the very next instance, we would then see as the blue would then swallow him whole, as a defining explosion would then erupt inside the subway tunnel, as the ground above would then split apart, as dirt and concrete would then be launched into the air, as a massive cloud of dust began to burst from the entrance, drawing the attention of nearby sorcerers already fighting throughout Shibuya. As while turning to inside the ruined tunnel, we will see dust as they cover nearly everything, as Gojo stood perfectly still, his 6 eyes searching through the smoke, analyzing every trace of cursed energy as he tries to find him. Damn it, I can't let my guard down for even a second. Just how is he? But this is when suddenly his thoughts would then be interrupted, as pain suddenly shot throughout his body. Several deep cuts would then appear across his torso, as blood sprayed across the shattered concrete. As in the very next fraction of a second, we will then see his right leg as it will be separated cleanly from his body, as Gojo's eyes widen. Are you serious? He would think, as without wasting a single moment, the reverse curse technique activated once again, as his legs regenerated as he landed on top of a pile of broken concrete outside, as the damaged subway entrance continued to crumble behind him. Meanwhile, Gojo remained perfectly still as he began to look forward. My 6 eyes, they failed to register the attack? He would think this, but this is where before he can go further, he then sensed something above him. His head immediately snapped upwards, as this is when the smoke hanging over the battlefield would then slowly split apart, as Yuji would then emerge from within. His 6 white wings carrying him effortlessly throughout the air, as his black hoodie remained untouched, as not even a single scratch marked his body. As Gojo just stared silently for a moment, as he then realizes that this was the one that Megumi was warning everyone about. As he calmly removed what remained of his damaged jacket and tossed it aside, revealing the black shirt underneath, as he stretched one shoulder and continuing to analyze the situation. Twice. He's been bypassing infinity twice. Whatever he's using, the 6 eyes aren't registering it correctly. That means the automatic infinity can't be trusted anymore. What a pain. If I don't consciously defend against whatever he's doing, I'll lose more than an arm next time. The memory of another battle briefly surfaced as a man with no curse energy entered his mind, Toji Zenin. However, instead of frustration, a small smile began to slowly spread across Gojo's face. It's been a while since I had a fight like this, he would say as he lowered into his stance before a grin would then spread across his face. Alright then, show me what you got, he would declare, as Yuji hearing this would then silently raise one hand, as soon the white particles drifting from his wings would then rapidly begin to gather together, as you'll see one orb and then another, as several concentrated spheres of superheated plasma would then be floating beside him, each emitting enough energy to distort the surrounding air, as Yuji then pointed it towards Gojo. In the very next instant, every orb then fired, as a brilliant plasma beam would then tore across the sky, as Gojo remained where he stood, while infinity expanded around him. As the very moment that each beam would then approach Gojo, this is when they'll be slowed to a halt just before reaching his body, as they'll be unable to cross the invisible distance separating them, as Gojo then smiled, and then without another word, he would then disappear. Now Yuji seeing this would then calmly turn around, already knowing what's going to happen, as he will see Gojo had already appeared behind him. As while his fist was coated into dense curse energy, this is where with a wide grin, he would then drive a punch directly into Yuji's chest, as the impact detonated like an explosion as Yuji was launched through the air before then crashing into the streets below. As the collision shattered the ground, as a massive crater then formed beneath him, as shockwaves spread across Shibuya, causing nearby buildings to shake. As both civilians and sorcerers instinctively turned towards the source of the impact, with many wondering what was going on, this being on the civilian side, while sorcerers were wondering if Gojo was insane since they had to protect the civilians. He was doing more property damage than good. As turning to Gojo, we will see him not let up as he didn't give Yuji time to recover. As soon another blue would then form into his hands, this time much larger and far more denser, as he immediately released it at maximum output. As the enormous sphere would then surge downward, swallowing everything in its path, as streets, vehicles, and chunks of concrete were then violently pulled towards the center. While Yuji, he would just look up at the approaching technique as his expression remained unchanged. Then, dark matter spread outward, as within an instant, we will see Yuji as he analyzed the vectors acting upon blue and immediately began to manipulate the surrounding forces. As soon, we will see the attraction within blue then be reversed, as the technique would then stop. As Gojo's eyes widened, as for the first time since the battle begun, someone had directly countered one of his limitless techniques. But before he could react any further, the battlefield began to shift again as dark matter began to spread throughout the surrounding streets. as buildings began to fracture, steel beams began to bend, as entire sections of shattered pavement began to rise into the air before launching towards Gojo from every direction. And Gojo, seeing this, immediately accelerated throughout the battlefield, as some attacks were being halted by infinities, while others were avoided through precise movements enhanced by Limitless, as he weaved through the barrage without slowing down. And watching him throughout all this will be Yuji, who remained completely calm. There's no point. I already have you figured out. He would think mentally, as years before this battle, Kenjaku had made Yuji study every available piece of information regarding Satoru Gojo. His techniques, his habits, his strengths, his weaknesses, everything that Yuji has been studying relentlessly with dark matter and everything he's been trained to have been developed in order to fight the strongest sorcerer alive. But even with all this information, Yuji for some reason still hasn't aimed for the fatal blow. As Gojo would then suddenly smile again, as a red sphere would then condense within his hand, as in the very next instance he would then vanish before then reappearing directly behind Yuji. Curse technique, reversal red, he would declare, as the technique would then fire immediately, as the violent repulsive force would then strike Yuji squarely on the back, as his body would then shoot forward, crashing through one building after another before finally disappearing into the distance, as several structures collapse in succession as dust rose high above the city. And moments later, we would then see Yuji as he then emerged from the destruction, completely unharmed, as his wings carried him back into the air as if nothing had happened, as looking up at him, Gojo can't help but let out a short laugh. Man, you really are something else. Let's take this even further, shall we? He would say, as his grin never disappeared, as soon we will see space destroy around him. As Gojo accelerated forward once more while Yuji narrowed his eyes, as without hesitation he flew directly towards him. As the very moment that the distance between them disappeared, this is where their fists would then collide above the center of Shibuya, as a thunderous boom would then echo across the district, as the shockwave would then ripple throughout the surrounding streets, rattling the windows and shaking the nearby buildings. As from this point, we'll see the clash continue as Yuji found himself watching Gojo's face, as despite losing an arm earlier, and despite suffering wounds that bypass infinity, and despite watching both blue and red fail to end the fight as they did nothing to Yuji, Gojo was still smiling. And that was something that Yuji couldn't understand. Why? Why is he still smiling? Yuji would question mentally, as to him every battle had a purpose. Every action existed to achieve a result, and there was nothing enjoyable about this fight. Nothing at all. But yet the man standing before him clearly felt differently, as that realization confused Yuji more. However, at the same time, it interested him, as Yuji wanted to understand something he couldn't explain. So without another word, the battle would continue. As for the next several moments that went by, neither of them allowed the other even a brief opportunity to gain the advantage. The fight carried them throughout Shibuya, leaving destruction wherever they clashed. Buildings collapsed beneath the force of their attacks, streets were torn apart, and the surrounding landscape continued to change with every exchange. As throughout the battle, Satoru Gojo continuously pushed himself further, making full use of every aspect of the Limitless. His mastery over the curse energy and the experience he had accumulated over the years as the strongest sorcerer of the modern era was all thrown directly towards Yuji. Meanwhile, at the same time, Yuji continued to observe him, as every movement Gojo made was carefully analyzed. Every shift in his stance, every application of affinity, every use of blue and red, and every decision he made during the combat was immediately processed through dark matter. As the battle would continue, Yuji would adapt to each new approach almost as quickly as Gojo would reveal it, forcing the strongest sorcerer to constantly change his tactics in an attempt to stay one step ahead. And even so, Gojo refused to slow down. By this point, he already suffered numerous injuries throughout the battle, more than once, as Yuji had managed to bypass the infinity multiple times, forcing Gojo to repeatedly rely on reverse curse technique to repair the damages that were done, before pressing the attack once again, as every exchange pushed him closer to his physical and mental limits. Yet none of it caused the expression on his face to disappear. He was still smiling, and not an arrogant smile, not the confident grin he wore in front of his students, and not a smile meant to reassure those around him. It was a genuine one. The kind of smile that appeared naturally when someone was completely immersed in something they truly enjoyed. As the simple truth was unmistakable. Satoru Gojo was having fun. As to anyone else, this battle would have been a desperate struggle to survive, but to Gojo, it was something he had been searching for ever since he became the strongest. For years, every opponent had been someone he had needed to hold back against. Every battle ended before he could truly test himself, as the overwhelming difference in strength between himself and everyone else had slowly turned fighting into something predictable. And now, for the first time in years, he no longer needed to restrain himself, as standing before him was an opponent capable of surviving everything he could throw at him, an opponent who forced him to think, an opponent who could genuinely push him, and for Gojo, that alone made the battle enjoyable. Meanwhile, Yuji just found himself becoming increasingly fascinated. He understood fear, he understood self-preservation, and he understood being very efficient, as every living being should instinctively avoid situations that threaten their lives. Yet the person standing before him continued to smile while risking everything, as even after suffering injuries, and even after watching his techniques fail, and even after being pushed further than he had ever been expected to, Gojo continued to fight with genuine enjoyment, as Yuji simply couldn't understand it. No matter how many calculations he made, or no matter how many times he analyzed Gojo's behavior, he couldn't determine what was driving him. It wasn't logic, it wasn't necessity, it was something else. And as the battle continued, Yuji would then finally find himself wanting to know the answer, as this is where we would now turn to the scene. Turning to Shibuya, which had become almost unrecognizable, we will see the entire street had been reduced to rubble. Buildings leaned dangerously close after being caught in the aftermath of the countless exchanges, and smoke drifted through the air as fires continued burning throughout the district. And standing amidst the destruction were the two responsible for it all, as several dozen meters separated them, as Gojo slowly lowered his guard as he caught his breath. Damn, this guy's a real monster, he would say to himself as his breathing had become noticeably heavier. His body was covered in cuts and bruises accumulated throughout the battle, as the reverse curse technique was working overtime in order to repair the damage. But even with his healing, the constant strain of repeatedly restoring his body had begun taking its toll. Meanwhile, across from him, Yuji stood in complete silence, as aside from the thin layer of dust covering parts of his hoodie, there wasn't a single injury on him. As Gojo, seeing this, still couldn't believe that this guy was even human, but still nonetheless, he decides to roll one shoulder before then charging forward once again. But before Gojo could do so though, this is when Yuji would then interrupt him. Why? Why are you enjoying this? Yuji would question, as this causes Gojo to then stop as he looks at him in confusion. How could you enjoy this? At any moment your life could come to an end. You've been injured multiple times and you've been pushed to your limits, and yet you continue treating this like a game. So why? Yuji would question, as this causes Gojo to then remain silent for a brief moment. As Gojo begins to think for a moment before then suddenly, he then bursts into laughter. I'm sorry. Do I really need a reason? He would say to Yuji, causing his eyes to widen. As after he says this is where Gojo will then slowly rise into the air, as blue formed within one hand while red formed in the other, as the surrounding space immediately became unstable as both techniques gathered immense amounts of cursed energy. As Yuji just quietly stared, as the blue and red sphere slowly moved towards one another, and at that moment they would then merge into a deep purple sphere appearing between Gojo's hands, as the surrounding air distorted under its pressure as Gojo looked down at Yuji while still smiling. If you're always looking for a reason to enjoy living, then you're gonna spend your whole life forgetting to actually live it, he would declare as Yuji just stood motionless. As those words echoed throughout his mind, as while another word, Gojo would then extend his hand before then releasing the technique. As soon we would then see the hollow purple as it would shoot directly towards Yuji, consuming everything in its path. As Yuji didn't move however, as his eyes remained fixated on Gojo as his words repeated in his mind. As soon, we will see memories begin to surface one after another, as we will see Yuji recalling every single moment that led up to this point. His training with Kenjaku, but also the good moments like spending time with Junpei and his family, spending time with Mai, spending time with even Choso for that brief instant, and basically everything that he's experienced up to this point. The conversation he shared with each of them, the questions he had asked them, the choices he had made, the orders he had decided to ignore. As for the first time since his creation, Yuji realized that every one of those decisions had been his own. And they were not guided by logic or purpose. Yuji was just simply doing them because he felt like it. As Yuji would think about this is where, as the hollow purple was closing the remaining distance, one final thought would then cross his mind. You truly are a fascinating person, Satoru Gojo. As the second he says this is where we'll see the attack as it supposedly ends up engulfing him, as a massive section of Shibuya would then vanish beneath the overwhelming force, as the technique continued far beyond the battlefield before finally disappearing into the distance. As soon, silence would then fall upon Shibuya. As turning to Gojo, we will see him slowly land on the shattered ground as he would rest his hands on his knees for a brief moment as he tries to catch his breath. By this point now, he has truly exhausted himself as he used a large amount of his techniques on Yuji throughout the fight, and the Hollow Purple basically sealed the deal for him as he was really tired by this point. But finally, it seems as though the battle was over, until he then hears footsteps as they came from directly behind him, as Gojo closes his eyes for a brief moment before then letting out a helpless sigh. Figures, he would say as he then turns around, as standing several meters behind him would be Yuji, completely unharmed, as not even his hoodie had been damaged, as Gojo had immediately understood what happened. Yuji hadn't endured Hollow Purple, he just simply avoided it at the very last moment, as why would he just stand there and just take the attack like an idiot? As Yuji would look directly at Gojo, this is where Gojo would then begin to speak up after stretching the back of his head for a little bit and giving a tired smile. Oh dang, seems like you really got me, he would say as Yuji did not respond. He simply looked at Gojo in silence as the words Gojo had spoken earlier still lingered in his thoughts. As for the second time in recent days, this is where Yuji would then make a decision for himself. He decided to once again disobey Kenjaku's orders, as he no longer intended to continue this fight, which causes Gojo to notice this as he sees Yuji lowering his guard and decides to do the same thing. As the tension between them gradually disappeared, as a small smile would then return to Gojo's face. Well, if we're not going to keep fighting then, what exactly do you plan to do now? He would question to Yuji. As looking at Yuji, we will see him lower his gaze, as for the first time in his life, he didn't really have an answer. As Gojo watching him quietly and seeing the dilemma he was having, this is where he would then smile before then speaking up, saying, "Why don't you join Jujutsu High?" As to Gojo, just based off this fight alone, Yuji had more power than basically everyone in Jujutsu High, but that also meant that Yuji had a lot of potential that was still untapped. And he just saw him just brimming with it as he sees Yuji as someone who could not only surpass him but could fundamentally change the way Jujutsu society progresses from this point on. So due to that, Gojo would then offer Yuji to come join Jujutsu High. And Yuji hearing this, he began to think for a moment as he recalls Mai saying about Jujutsu sorcerers, considering the fact that she was in the Zenin clan. And so he begins to think exactly if he even wants to do so, but right before they can continue thinking like this is when suddenly they'll be interrupted. As soon from all angles, this is where Gojo would then be attacked, as streams of flames, transfigured humans, and also water will all be sent directly towards him, as Gojo's infinity will protect him just at the nick of time. But the same couldn't be said up for Yuji, who would also be attacked at the same time, which causes him to be confused, but nonetheless he's able to easily avoid it. As flying up into the air thanks to his 6 white wings, this is where Yuji would then look down to see all the disaster curses as they had been surrounding both Yuji and Gojo. And when Yuji looks at him in pure confusion, this is where Kenjaku's voice would then begin to ring out. Well, this is an interesting development. I don't remember this being part of our agreement, Yuji, Kenjaku would say as Yuji hearing his voice would then look directly towards him. As looking at Kenjaku, we will see him actually finally having a serious expression on his face, as the carefree smile that he usually had was no more, now replaced with dead seriousness as he realized exactly what was going on and did not like this one bit. As he mentally questions exactly where did everything go wrong here, as Yuji was not supposed to let Gojo survive, and better yet, Yuji was not even supposed to think outside of his mission. So what exactly caused this? As this causes Kenjaku to mentally even question if maybe Mayata had a hand in this, but he decides to save it in the back of his mind for now. As after all, currently right now, he wasn't dumb. He knew that if they openly decide to attack Yuji, they will lose 100% of the time. However, that didn't necessarily mean that they could just simply let him walk away. As while Kenjaku will be focusing on Yuji, this is where he would then tell the disaster curses to focus on Gojo. Since after all, now that he was extremely weakened due to his fight with Yuji, that would mean that they would have a better chance at taking down Gojo. As Gojo hearing and seeing Kenjaku for the first time, he would actually be surprised, as seeing Geto after so long, this caused Gojo to just be there stuck in stunned silence. Meanwhile, the disaster curses saw this as a perfect opportunity as they immediately bum rushed Gojo, as he would be too preoccupied with the shock to even avoid their attacks, as Infinity would be working overtime in order to protect him. Meanwhile, turning to Yuji, we will see him continuously look down at Kenjaku, who will begin to talk down to him, basically talking about how disappointed he was in Yuji and how he expected so much more from him. As Yuji hearing all this, he honestly was surprised that he didn't find himself caring whatsoever, as he stoically looked at the person who he called mother and also father, but as he was doing so, this is where Kenjaku would then have an underlying smile then begin to form. As after continuously talking for a few more moments, this is where Kenjaku would then tell Yuji that despite how intelligent he was and despite all the potential he had, it still didn't matter too much, as at the end of the day, Yuji was still nothing more but a child compared to him. As this is where right before Yuji could even move or even think any further, this is when suddenly multiple crimson-like substances would then latch onto his body, as this is where Kenjaku would then reveal his plan, aka the prison realm. As you see, Kenjaku knew better. He couldn't beat Yuji physically or anything like that, and he couldn't really beat Yuji in the terms of battle even with all the disaster curses. If they couldn't beat Gojo, then they had no chance against Yuji. But the thing is, they didn't really necessarily have to beat Yuji if they could possibly seal him. As basically, instead of using the Prison Realm on Gojo like in the main timeline, Kenjaku had decided to use Prison Realm on Yuji as a failsafe just in case. That's why he wasn't really too on board with Jogo's plan to use the Prison Realm on Gojo, since after all, he thought he may need it just in case for Yuji. As looking at Yuji, we will see him actually look at Kenjaku in surprise, as this is where Kenjaku then tells Yuji that unfortunately for him, he was too strong to continue being the modern era, especially if he was not going to fall in line with his plan. As Yuji hearing this would say nothing and simply look at Kenjaku, who would smile evilly, until suddenly this is where he would then have to dodge out of the way of a crimson spear, as it would nearly pierce him through his head as he dodges just at the nick of time, as while he does so, this is where he would then stop for a brief moment before then questioning with a angry tone, what's the meaning behind this, Choso? As turning to Choso, who was only a few distances away, this is when he would then angrily look at Kenjaku before then ordering him to release his brother. As hearing this causes both Yuji and Kenjaku to look at him confused, as this is where Choso would then immediately begin to lash out and attack Kenjaku, who would avoid all his attacks. However, Choso was not the only one, as soon we will see his brothers also begin to jump in when it comes to taking down Kenjaku, as we will see Kenjaku as he proceeds to go in a 1v3, as Choso and his two brothers will all jump in, attacking with different blood attacks in order to beat down on Kenjaku, who will be forced to avoid all this. And Yuji looking at this will be confused about why even Choso is even trying to help him, but then once again this causes Mai's words to ring out in his ear, along with everything that he's experienced up to this point. As basically Yuji will once again question himself about what he wants to do. As the prison realm begins to activate once again, as it proceeds to get closer and closer to sealing Yuji away, this is where Yuji would then begin to act in the final moments. As recalling Mai one last time and remembering basically everything he's experienced with her, this is where Yuji would then finally decide to act. As right as the prison realm was about to seal Yuji, this is where dark matter would then take effect. As turning to the white particles, we will see them be directed directly into the prison realm, as the prison realm will fully shut in, keeping Yuji locked inside, as for a moment everyone in the battlefield would look on in complete silence, as Choso would look at the prison realm in complete shock before once again getting angry and attacking Kenjaku, with the other brothers jumping in as well. However, as this was going on, turning to inside the prison realm, we will see it as currently right now the entire inside of it was getting filled with white particles of dark matter. As Yuji would be there silently, making sure to calculate everything until eventually he found the proper calculations. As this is where he would then openly decide that he would decide to take action for himself. As now turning to a few moments later, we will now look outside to see Kenjaku as he stood over Choso, who is currently on the ground. As around him we will see Choso's brothers who had now been defeated, considering the fact that Kenjaku was just, well, more powerful than them. Meanwhile, a short distance away we will see Gojo as he was facing off against the disaster curses. And while usually this would be a very easy fight to him, mind you, this is a Gojo who is extremely exhausted, as he had basically unloaded and uses everything that he had to his advantage in order to face off against Yuji. But now he had kind of wasted himself entirely, causing him to just basically be forced to fight Jogo, Dagon, Hanami, and Maito all at the same time. As Kenjaku would look down at Choso with a smirk, telling him that him trying to stand up to him was pointless, with Choso not giving a damn. He didn't care if he even died at this very moment, as all he wanted was for his brothers to be free. However, just as Kenjaku was about to raise his hand to dealt the final blow, this is when suddenly the prison rail would then begin to shake, as a trembling pressure begins to release from it, shaking up the entirety of the battlefield that was once Shibuya. as Kenjaku would slowly turn his gaze towards it as he begins to think in his mind. No, there's no way. That should be impossible. There's no way that, but unfortunately for Kenjaku, what he thought was impossible would turn out to be reality. As soon we will see the prison realm as suddenly it will begin to burst open, as suddenly emerging from the prison realm in a glowing divine light will be none other than Yuji. As he would emerge from there with his 6 white wings guiding him up into the air like an angel, as he would look down at Kenjaku once again. As Kenjaku would look at him in complete shock, unable to even think at the very moment, but right before he could say anything else, this is when suddenly he would feel his arm disappear. As pain would immediately shoot through his system as he looks down to see that his right arm was now gone, as he immediately jumps back. He curses mentally as he tries to figure out a strategy about what else to do, but before he could do anything else, suddenly he begins to get skewered from multiple angles, as no matter what he tried to do to defend himself, it wouldn't work. As this will go on for a few moments until Kenjaku would then finally try releasing all the cursed spirits in his arsenal, with each one of them rushing towards Yuji, who just simply looks at them before then slaughtering them using dark matter. Until eventually, finally, Kenjaku would then run out of resources as he would collapse to the ground, looking at Yuji with bridled anger but also intrigue, as he couldn't help but marvel at his own creation, as he can't help but feel a little bit reluctant to leave this world, especially since he wouldn't see exactly what Yuji would become. As just thinking about everything he was gonna miss caused Kenjaku to feel a faint bitterness in his chest. But nonetheless, that doesn't mean he was gonna go out of the fight, as after getting up for one final stand, he will look at Yuji one last time before letting him know directly into his face that he is his biggest disappointment. However, Yuji upon hearing this then suddenly moves, as before Kenjaku could react, his head would be sliced off in an instant, as his eyes would widen in complete shock, but just before his consciousness would fade, he would hear Yuji's final words. "Goodbye, father." As that would be the last thing that Kenjaku would hear before his consciousness would then fade away. As now turning to Yuji once again, we will see him look down at Kenjaku's body before then turning back towards Gojo as well as Choso. As turning back towards Gojo, we will see him as by this point now he was able to successfully deal with the disaster curses. As well, yes, he was weakened. Even though he was weakened, that just meant that it was going to take a little bit longer time when it came to dealing with them. However, nonetheless, Gojo was victorious in defeating all the disaster curses. As now with the primary threats now being disposed of, this is where we can now do one last time skip. So now turning to a few months later, following the incident that happened in the final battle of Shibuya, we will see that during this time, Jujutsu High had done their best to cover up about the events that took place there, with it being pinned to a massive earthquake, as that's what the media was rolling with following the incident. And while many theorists online suspected that that wasn't the case, it never extended further than that. And along with covering up the events that took place there, we will see many curse users be taken into custody by Jujutsu High, with the school elders wanting to know about everything that went down, along with what was Kenjaku's plans, as they eventually found out who was behind it. And thanks to this intel provided by them, they were even able to find the missing fingers of Sukuna. However, when it came to anything else that was stolen, they were never found. And along with that, we will see that the strange boy with wings, who seemed to be associated with Kenjaku, as for some odd reason, he was nowhere to be found. As following that incident, there have been no sightings of him whatsoever, as no matter how many sorcerers they sent out to look for him and bring him back, no one was able to find him. As from here, this is where we're now going to turn to a scene. So now turning to one of the rooftops, which was currently abandoned throughout Shibuya, we will now see a group of 4 as they were currently looking down the horizon of what remained of, well, Shibuya. As looking at each one of them, we will see familiar faces, as it will be Yuji along with Choso along with his other 2 brothers. As currently right now, the 4 of them will be looking over the entirety of Shibuya, as currently it will be nighttime, with Choso asking Yuji if he was ready to go, with Yuji saying yes. However, right before they were able to leave, this is when suddenly he will then stop, as he says that he still has one more thing he has left to take care of. As with that, this is where we're now going to turn our attention to a familiar forest. Currently sitting on the log and looking at the midnight sky, we will see a familiar girl who will be sitting there with a odd but yet peaceful look on her face. With this being Maya, she was currently right now waiting for a certain someone to arrive, as she had been there for a couple of moments way earlier than how she usually appears. As after sitting here for a couple of minutes, this is when suddenly she will then see someone descending from above, as she will see a familiar stoic face. As soon landing on the ground before her with his 6 white wings behind him would be obviously Yuji. as the two would calmly stare at each other before Yuji would then be the first one to speak up, as he just calmly says hey. As hearing this causes Mai to look at him stoically for a few seconds before then letting out a small chuckle, considering the fact that she's usually the one to speak up first. However, upon looking at him once again, this is where she would then get serious, as she comments that he's the boy with the wings. As after hearing about everything that happened with Megumi, along with everything that happened down in Shibuya, she had begun to suspect him, and now currently seeing him in full display, she obviously knew that now it was him. As Yuji upon hearing this would say nothing else, as she would look at him stoically for a few seconds before then asking why exactly was he even here. As Yuji hearing this would then pause, trying to think over a response, before eventually he would then finally decide to be honest about it, as he says that he wants to see her one last time. As hearing this causes Mai to be confused, as this is where Yuji would then look up to the sky before then declaring that he decides that he's going to go off and travel the world. Since currently right now, Yuji had decided that Jujutsu Society wasn't really meant for him. Despite being blessed with extraordinary abilities, he realized that this wasn't the life that he wanted to lead anymore. Or rather, this wasn't the life that he wanted for himself just yet. He still didn't even know what he wanted. So due to that, he wanted to explore and find out more about himself before he could make a decision. So in order to do that, he then decided to end up leaving this life behind and decided to find things out for himself. And who knows, maybe traveling across the world, he might find something else that he likes or wants to live for. As hearing Yuji declaring all this causes Mai to look at him once again, before then smiling softly saying that he has changed. As she could see that despite Yuji still having that usual stoic look on his face, he actually seemed much more open despite being, well, still stoic. As after Mai says this is where Yuji would then say that he had, before then turning to her once again, as he ends up thanking her for this. As this caused Mai to look at him with a raised eyebrow, as Yuji would then declare that most of the events that ended up happening to his life and most of the changes that ended up happening to himself was all because of her. As he begins to actually explain the sensations he was feeling, as since Yuji wasn't really 100% sure exactly how to describe his emotions, he would try to do his best to explain like the feeling of it all. As from here, this is where he begins to talk about the feelings he was feeling throughout the entire time of them growing up. As he explains at first that he didn't really know what to even think about her, mostly because of the fact that he found her just odd and unnecessary for him to even give her his attention. But over time, something began to click for Yuji that he just simply didn't understand. And the more that he continued to speak, we would actually see shadows beginning to cover Mai's face as she continues to listen to Yuji until eventually he finally stops. As after saying everything that had been on his mind, this is where Yuji would then turn to look at Mai one last time before then declaring and telling her, "Thank you for everything." As hearing this causes Mai to not say anything, as Yuji would then take that as a sign to leave. As he turns around, now fully preparing to leave and go off on his own, but right before he could, this is when he would then hear rushing footsteps going towards him, as this caused him to turn around. And soon before he could react, this is where Mai would then pull him into an embrace, as she would call him an idiot. As hearing her say this causes Yuji to then be confused until Mai would then suddenly then begin to confess, saying that at first she didn't even know who Yuji was and thought of him as nothing more but a random kid. But eventually over time, as the two grew up together, she found herself caring more and more for him, to the point where she truly saw Yuji as someone she valued and someone that she cared about a lot. As hearing this causes Yuji to then be stunned, but also happy, as letting his body move on instinct, this is where he would then pull her into an embrace as well. As soon silence would then fall over to the forest one final time, before then Yuji would then do something surprising as he would ask Mai if she wants to come with him. As Mai hearing this would be stunned, but this is where Yuji would once again offer for her to come with him. As he ends up pointing out how she basically ends up despising Jujutsu Society and asks her if she wants to come with him in order to travel across the world, and that way they could live their lives. As this is where he would then ask her the question about what she wants to do with her life. As Mai upon hearing this would pause for a few moments before suddenly we would then see tears beginning to fall from her eyes, as she would then declare that she wants to spend her life with him. As Yuji upon hearing this would once again pull her into her embrace, as she would do the same thing. As this will be the last thing we will see, as this will be the end to What If Yuji had dark matter manipulation. Thank y'all so much for tuning into this What If. Sorry this What If took so long. I'm about to do a whole live stream just talking about this What If and basically everything that was going on during this time because I got a lot to say. But yeah, I'm gonna try once again posting more What Ifs and start doing, start getting back being consistent on this channel again. And yeah, I just don't got nothing else to say, y'all. I'm sorry, but your boy's just drained out of energy by this point. So yeah, it's your host, Seiji Samurai, and he's signing off. So peace and have a lovely day.
Colors, switch the color, 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 switch it, switch the color, colors, switch the color, 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 switch it, switch the color.